close your eyes and think about the chair beneath you, the light above you, the screen in front of you. None of it existed once. Every invention we rely on today, from the wheel to the wireless, began as nothing but an idea, and often a failure. Tonight, we'll drift through the quiet psychology behind why humans invent, and explore innovations born not just from brilliance, but from breakdowns, doubts, and dreams. Let the journey begin, and slowly fall asleep. The discovering of electricity. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back in time to an era when the world was cloaked in darkness after sunset, when the flicker of a candle was the only light guiding human hands. Tonight, we journey through the story of electricity, a tale of curiosity, struggle, and triumph, of brilliant minds who dared to question, to fail, and to try again. And perhaps, as we explore their journey, we'll find a little wisdom to carry into our own lives. Long before switches and bulbs, electricity was a mysterious force. Ancient civilizations glimpsed its power in lightning, in the strange shocks from electric fish. The Greeks, over 2,600 years ago, rubbed amber and noticed it attracted feathers. They called it electron, the origin of our word electricity. But for centuries, it remained a puzzle, a fleeting phenomenon without explanation. Until the 1600s, when a curious English scientist named William Gilbert took the first step. He studied magnets and static electricity, distinguishing it from mere magic. But the true revolution was yet to come. Imagine a stormy night in 1752. A man named Benjamin Franklin stands in a field, flying a kite with a metal key tied to its string. Lightning strikes, and sparks leap from the key, proving lightning was electrical. Franklin's daring experiment could have killed him, but his courage unlocked a new understanding. Yet, even he didn't fully grasp electricity's potential. Decades later, an Italian scientist, Alessandro Volta, faced ridicule for his experiments. People laughed when he claimed metals could generate electricity. But in 1800, he stacked zinc and copper discs, separated by brine-soaked cloth, creating the first true battery, the voltaic pile. His persistence lit the way for others. Then came Michael Faraday, a poor bookbinder's apprentice with no formal education. He dreamed of harnessing electricity's power. For years, he failed. Critics dismissed him. But in 1831, his patience paid off. He discovered electromagnetic induction, the principle behind generators. Without Faraday, our modern world wouldn't hum with power. And what of Thomas Edison? We remember him as the inventor of the light bulb, but few know he failed thousands of times. His lab notes reveal years of frustration. "I have not failed," he said. "I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Finally, in 1879, a carbon filament bulb glowed for 14 hours, a beacon of perseverance. So, what can we learn from these pioneers? Resilience. Franklin risked his life. Volta ignored mockery. Faraday, with no wealth or status, changed the world. And Edison embraced failure as part of success. In our lives, we too face dark moments, times when dreams seem out of reach, when failure weighs heavy. But remember, every great discovery began with a question. Every triumph with a struggle. The light didn't appear in an instant. It was the result of countless trials, of stubborn hope, Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let their stories remind you, persistence is power. Every small effort, every flicker of curiosity adds up. And who knows, perhaps your own spark of perseverance will light up the world one day. The story of electricity is more than wires and bulbs. It's a testament to human spirit. So, when you switch on a light, remember the centuries of effort behind it. And remember, even in your darkest moments, keep trying. Because just like electricity, greatness often starts with a single, stubborn spark. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be as bright as the discoveries we've shared tonight. The light bulb. Let's wander back to a time when nightfall meant shadows, when homes were bathed in the dim, flickering glow of gas lamps and candles. Tonight, we follow the journey of a man who refused to let darkness win. A man whose name became synonymous with light itself, Thomas Edison. But his path, like all great journeys, was paved not with instant triumph, but with stubbornness, failure, and an unshakable belief that impossible was just a word. Edison was no stranger to struggle. Born into a world without electric light, he dreamed of illuminating the night. Yet his early years were marked by hardship. Teachers called him addled, too distracted by curiosity to fit into classrooms. But Edison's mind burned with ideas, and by his 20s, he'd turned a humble workshop in Menlo Park, New Jersey, into an invention factory. It was here, amid cluttered desks and the smell of oil and metal, that he set his sights on a seemingly impossible goal: creating a practical electric light bulb. The challenge was immense. For decades, inventors had tried and failed to sustain light without fire. They used platinum, carbon, even tiny strips of paper, but their bulbs flickered out in minutes or melted into smoke. Edison, undeterred, vowed to crack the code. He assembled a team, tinkerers and thinkers, and together they began. Night after night, the workshop glowed with experiments, and failure after failure piled up. Over 1,000 prototypes, each a lesson in what didn't work. Newspapers mocked him. Investors doubted him. Even his own team sometimes whispered, "Is this worth it?" But Edison, with his rumpled coat and ink-stained hands, kept going. He tested 6,000 materials for the filament alone, from bamboo threads to spider silk. Each attempt brought a spark, then darkness. "I have not failed," he'd say. "I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And then, on a quiet October night in 1879, it happened. A carbonized cotton thread, sealed in a glass bulb, glowed and kept glowing. 14 hours passed, and the light still burned. The room fell silent, then erupted in awe. Edison, ever the pragmatist, simply scribbled in his notebook, "Success at last." Yet, the story doesn't end there. Inventing the bulb was one thing. Lighting the world was another. Edison spent years building power plants, designing wiring, convincing skeptics that electric light was safe. Critics called it a fad. But he pressed on. By the time he was done, entire cities shimmered, and night, once a barrier, became a canvas for human ingenuity. So, what can we learn from Edison's relentless glow? That failure isn't the end. It's the rough draft of success. That progress isn't a single eureka, but 1,000 tiny steps. each one teaching us something new. In your own life, when doubts creep in, when a project stumbles or a dream feels distant, remember Edison's workshop. Remember that every no, every setback is just a detour, not a dead end. The world needs your light, even if it takes 1,000 tries to ignite. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that first fragile bulb, burning stubbornly against the dark. Let its glow remind you, persistence is its own kind of magic. And just like Edison, you are allowed to take your time, to falter, to learn, and to rise again until your own light shines through. We airplane picture a world where the sky belonged only to birds, where humans gazed upward, earthbound, wondering, what if? Tonight, we drift back to the windswept dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and the story of two brothers who turned a childhood dream into wings. A story not of instant flight, but of patience, obsession, and the quiet courage to fail again and again until the impossible took flight. Wilbur and Orville Wright were not scholars or wealthy inventors. They were bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, tinkerers who loved gears and grease and the hum of a workshop. The journey began in whispers. They devoured books on bird wings, studied the physics of gliders, and wrote to the Smithsonian, begging for research. Skeptics laughed. If God meant humans to fly, they said, he would have given us wings. But the brothers pressed on, their minds fixed on the horizon. They built their first glider in 1900, a fragile wooden skeleton draped in muslin, and carried it to Kitty Hawk, where the winds blew strong and steady. That first test, piloted like a kite, barely skimmed the dunes, yet it was a start. What followed were years of meticulous obsession. They returned to Kitty Hawk every autumn, sleeping in a drafty shack, battling mosquitoes and sandstorms. Each glider they built, each tweak to the wings, taught them something new. But failure was their constant companion. Their 1901 glider bucked and crashed, its wings generating too little lift. Critics declared their goal a fantasy, but the brothers didn't falter. Instead, they did something radical. They built a wind tunnel. In their tiny Dayton workshop, they tested over 200 wind shapes, scribbling data in notebooks. For the first time, flight wasn't guesswork. It was science. By 1903, they were ready. Their new machine, the Flyer, had wings shaped by data, a lightweight engine, and propellers carved like spinning wings. On December 14th, Wilbur won a coin toss for the first flight, but the Flyer stalled, crashing into the sand. 3 days later, under leaden skies, it was Orville's turn. At 10:35 a.m., with icy winds howling, the Flyer rattled down a rail, and for 12 seconds, it soared. 12 seconds, 120 feet, a leap that shattered humanity's chains to the earth. By day's end, Wilbur flew 852 feet, lingering aloft for nearly a minute. The age of flight had begun, not with a roar, but with the soft sigh of fabric catching the wind. Yet no one celebrated. Newspapers ignored the achievement. Crowds dismissed it as a hoax. It took 5 years and endless refinement before the world believed. Through it all, the brothers stayed humble, their eyes always on the next problem, the next tweak. They never married, never strayed from their mission. Flight was their first love, and they nurtured it, one calculation, one propeller turn at a time. So what wisdom do their wings leave us? That greatness isn't born in triumph, But in the grind, the silent hours of testing, failing, and refining, that doubters will always whisper, but curiosity, when paired with patience, can silence them. When you face your own mountains, remember the Wrights in their windswept shack, fixing what broke, learning what worked, refusing to rush. Progress is a slow dance, not a sprint. And sometimes, the greatest rewards come to those willing to fall, as long as they keep reaching for the sky. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first fragile wings trembling against the wind. Let them remind you, every setback is a gust, steering you, not stopping you, and even the wildest dreams, when tended with grit and grace, can soar higher and higher until they vanish into the stars. The steam engine. Let's travel back to the misty hills of 18th century Scotland, where clanging hammers and the hiss of steam whispered of a revolution yet to come. Tonight, we follow the story of a quiet, sickly boy who grew up to harness the power of fire and water. A man named James Watt. His journey, like the machines he perfected, was slow, deliberate, and fueled by a simple truth. Even the smallest tweak can change the world. Young James Watt was not a man of grand gestures. He preferred the hum of a workshop to the clamor of crowds, tinkering with instruments in Glasgow's shadowy university halls. Back then, steam engines were clunky giants, invented decades earlier by Thomas Newcomen to pump water from mines. But they gulped coal like thirsty beasts, their pistons lurching in wasteful bursts. Watt, ever the observer, noticed their flaws. Why, he wondered, does it take so much to do so little? One Sunday in 1765, while wandering Glasgow Green, inspiration struck. The problem, he realized, was heat. Newcomen's engine cooled its cylinder with every stroke, wasting energy. Watt's solution? A separate condenser, a chamber to cool steam without chilling the entire machine. It was a revelation, sketched hastily in his notebook. But ideas, as Watt would learn, are the easy part. Turning them into iron and brass, that's where the true labor begins. For years, he wrestled with leaks, faulty materials, and empty pockets. His first prototype, built with borrowed tools, barely sputtered to life. Investors scoffed. Mine owners shrugged. Even his wife grew weary, as their home filled with scrap metal and unpaid bills. But Watt, hunched over drafts by candlelight, kept refining. His hands, stained with grease and ink, sketched gears, valves, and endless calculations. Perfection, he knew, lived in the details. Then came Matthew Boulton, a visionary manufacturer who saw poetry in Watt's persistence. "I sell what the world desires," Boulton declared. Power. Their partnership in 1775 birthed Boulton and Watt, a company devoted not to building engines, but perfecting them. Together, they inched forward. Watt introduced the double-acting engine. Using steam to push pistons both ways, he added a centrifugal governor, a spinning brass brain that balanced speed like a heartbeat. Each tweak, each adjustment, squeezed more work from less coal. What once wasted 80% of its fuel now hummed with thrift and purpose. Yet, success was not swift. It took 11 years from that Sunday stroll to their first reliable engine. Factories resisted. Workers feared the machines, and rivals pirated their designs. Watt, plagued by migraines and doubt, often wrote, "I am sick of the world." But he never stopped. By 1776, their engines pumped mines, spun cotton mills, and powered breweries, quietly igniting the Industrial Revolution. The world, once bound by muscle and millpond, now ran on steam. Oh, what can we learn from Watt's slow-burning triumph? That progress rarely arrives in explosions, but in whispers, in the stubborn pursuit of better. That a single idea, nurtured through setbacks, can ripple across centuries. When you face your own challenges, remember Watt's workshop, where every screw turned, every valve adjusted, was a step towards something vast. You needn't overhaul your life in a day. Just tend to the gears, one thoughtful turn at a time, and trust that efficiency in work or in spirit compounds. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first steam engines, their pistons sighing like sleeping giants. Let their rhythm remind you, even the mightiest revolutions begin with a single question, a single tweak, a single soul who dares to say, "This can be better." Your better might be quiet. It might take years, but the world, in time, will feel its warmth. The compass. Let's drift back to a time when the world's edges were still shrouded in mystery, when travelers relied on the stars, the wind, and the whispers of intuition to find their way. Tonight, we wander through the story of an ancient stone, a humble tool, and the quiet revolution it sparked, a revolution that would guide explorers across deserts, oceans, and the vast, uncharted corners of the human spirit. This is the story of the compass. Long before it pointed sailors north, the compass began as magic. In the misty mountains of ancient China, over 2,000 years ago, a curious mineral caught the eye of mystics and scholars. Lodestone, a dark, heavy rock, seemed to pulse with invisible energy. When carved into a spoon, it turned all on its own to align with the heavens. The Chinese called it the stone that loves the South, and they believed it held secrets of the cosmos. Emperors used it to harmonize palaces with the stars, diviners to predict fortunes, but none yet dreamed it could tame the chaos of the open sea. Centuries passed, and the lodestone's magic slowly took shape. By the Song dynasty, around 1000 AD, scholars floated magnetized needles on water, watching them tremble, then settle, pointing unerringly south. These south-pointing fish, as they were called, were delicate, fragile, their purpose still tied to rituals and art. But slowly, quietly, the compass began to wander beyond temples. Caravans crossing the Silk Road, jolting in wooden carts under endless skies, clutched lodestone needles to avoid losing their way. Still, the true voyage lay ahead. Then came the sailors. In the bustling ports of the Ming Dynasty, shipbuilders crafted towering junks, vessels ready to brave the monsoon winds. But the sea, vast and vengeful, swallowed even the bravest crews when clouds hid the stars. A navigator's greatest fear? Losing sight of the sky. Until one day, a nameless inventor, perhaps a sailor, perhaps a scholar, pierced a magnetized needle through a bamboo slip, let it pivot on a pin, and sealed it in a lacquered box. The first marine compass, a flicker of certainty in the crushing dark. Yet, this new tool was met with distrust. Old captains scoffed. Why trust a trembling needle over the gods? But the winds of change blew stubbornly. By the 15th century, Admiral Zheng He's treasure ships, guided by compasses and star charts, sailed as far as Africa, their holds heavy with silk and porcelain. The needle, once a diviner's toy, had become a silent captain, steering humanity toward horizons they'd never dared to reach. Word of the south-pointing fish seeped westward, carried by Arab traders across deserts, then to European mapmakers hungry for new routes. Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, Vasco da Gama, all gripped compasses as they carved paths across oceans. Empires rose and fell, wars raged, but the needle, unblinking, never wavered. It guided not just ships, but the course of history itself. And what of the lodestone's first guardians, the Chinese inventors who never saw their creation's full flight? Their names are lost, erased by time, like footprints in tide-washed sand. They died without knowing how far their stone would travel, how many lives it would save, how many worlds it would stitch together. So, what remains of their legacy? A lesson as steady as the compass itself. True guidance isn't about the tool, but the courage to trust it. The lodestone didn't create explorers, it revealed them. In your own life, when storms cloud your path, when the stars vanish, remember that we all carry an inner compass. It might tremble, it might spin, but deep within, it knows the way. The ancients called it intuition, faith, or simply stillness. Whatever its name, it is your lodestone. Your quiet North Star. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that ancient needle floating on a pool of water, turning, turning, until it finds its truth. Let it remind you, even in uncertainty, you are never truly lost. Every wrong turn, every detour is just the needle adjusting, aligning, preparing you for the journey ahead. The printing press. Imagine a world where books were rare, fragile, handwritten by monks in candlelit silence, each page a fortune. A world where knowledge was locked in ivory towers, until a stubborn goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg dared to ask, what if words could fly? Tonight, we wander through his story, a tale of brilliance shadowed by ruin, of a man who lit a fire that outshone his own life and died without seeing its glow. Born in 1400s Germany, Gutenberg grew up amid clinking metal and the scent of molten gold. A craftsman by trade, he knew the weight of precision, the dance of hammer and die, but his mind buzzed with grander visions. While others etched jewelry, he dreamed of inking letters, not onto parchment, but into history. His idea? A machine that could stamp words like coins, page after page, perfect and identical. A printing press. The road was steep. For years, he toiled in secret, squandering his inheritance on experiments. He crafted metal type, each letter a tiny sculpture. He mixed ink thick as midnight and adapted wine presses to bear the weight of pages. But gold drained faster than ink, and Gutenberg, desperate, borrowed from a ruthless moneylender, Johann Fust. The deal? Funds to finish or lose everything. His workshop hummed with hope as the first Bible took shape. 1,282 pages. 42 lines per page, each character crisp as frost. It was a masterpiece, a symphony of mechanics and art. Then, disaster. In 1455, Fust sued, accusing Gutenberg of squandering loans. The courts seized his press, his tools, even the Bibles meant to crown his life's work. Overnight, the inventor became a debtor, banished from his own creation. Fust took the press, the glory, the profits. Gutenberg, now gray and weary, drifted into obscurity, his name scrubbed from the very pages he'd birthed. He died in 1468, buried in an unmarked grave, his pockets empty, his genius unheralded. Yet his press endured. Within decades, millions of books cascaded across Europe, carrying science, faith, and revolution. Luther's protests, Galileo's stars, Shakespeare's sonnets all rode the wings Gutenberg had forged. He never saw it, never felt the world reshape beneath his feet. But the press, like a seed planted in winter, bloomed long after the gardener had gone. So what wisdom lingers in his inky fingerprints? That legacy isn't measured in coins or acclaim, or even a named grave. It's etched in the quiet ripples we leave behind. Gutenberg's true wealth wasn't in gold, but in the minds he awakened, the voices he unchained. In your own life, when efforts go unseen, when credit slips away, remember, the world is shaped less by those who clutch at glory than by those who plant trees they'll never sit under. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, picture those first printed pages, their letters standing tall like soldiers of light. Let them remind you, not all heroes witness their triumph. Some simply bend their backs to the work, trusting that history, in time, will turn the page. Your labor, however small, however overlooked, is a thread in a tapestry you may never see. And that is enough. The telescope. Let's gaze upward to a time when the night sky was a tapestry of mystery, its stars fixed in crystal spheres, untouched by human hands. Tonight, we follow the story of a man who dared to lift the veil of heaven, a man whose lens rewrote the cosmos, but cost him everything. This is the tale of Galileo Galilei and the telescope that turned wonder into war. Galileo was born in 1564 in a world where the earth sat motionless, crowned by God as the universe's unchanging heart. But Galileo, a restless scholar with a poet's soul, saw cracks in the old truths. He studied pendulums, sketched falling objects, and whispered questions that unsettled the wise. Then, in 1609, news reached him from Holland. A toy, a tube with lenses that made distant ships appear close. Galileo, ever the tinkerer, seized the idea. For weeks, he ground glass by candlelight, bending light into focus, until his telescope magnified the heavens 20-fold. It was crude, a wooden cylinder wrapped in leather, but it would soon split history in two. One frosty January night, he pointed it at the moon. What he saw shattered ancient myths. Craters, mountains, shadows dancing on a surface as flawed as Earth. The moon, long worshipped as a perfect orb, was a world. Next, he turned his lens to Jupiter and gasped. 4 stars clung to the planet, shifting nightly. Moons orbiting another world. Here was proof. The universe did not revolve around Earth. The Church's teachings, the very bedrock of truth, trembled. Galileo scribbled in his notebook, "The Milky Way is a mass of innumerable stars." But his greatest discovery, the phases of Venus, mirrored those of the moon, confirming Copernicus's heresy. The Earth moved. Galileo's triumph, though, was short-lived. He published his findings in the Starry Messenger, and the world erupted. Scholars hailed him. Poets compared him to Columbus. But the Church, guardian of divine order, recoiled. In 1616, he was summoned to Rome, warned to abandon Copernican ideas. The Bible, they said, teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. Galileo, ever stubborn, nodded, but kept studying. For years, he walked a tightrope, praising faith while penning forbidden truths. Then, in 1632, he published Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, a debate between scholars, one defending the old cosmos, the other the new. The Church saw heresy, and Galileo, now old and ailing, was dragged to trial. The verdict was swift. Kneeling in a cardinal's hall, robes scratching his skin, Galileo renounced his life's work. "I abjure, curse, detest my errors," he muttered, as the Inquisition's pen scratched his shame into history. Spared torture, but broken, he spent his final years under house arrest, his telescopes silenced, his letters monitored. Yet, even confined, he wrote about motion, about tides, about the universe he could no longer see. He died in 1642, blind, but still whispering, "And yet it moves." What remains of his struggle? The stars, unbothered, still spin. The moons of Jupiter still dance. And the Church, centuries later, apologized. But Galileo's true legacy isn't in lenses or planets. It's in the courage to see beyond the visible, to question even when answers terrify. In your own life, when authority insists the world is flat, when doubters call your curiosity dangerous, remember Galileo's flickering candle, grinding glass, and his unyielding truth. Knowledge is not sin. The universe is vast, and there is room in its infinite expanse for both faith and wonder. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first starlit hours, the chill of the telescope in Galileo's hands, the gasp of discovery, the weight of silence that followed. Let them remind you, even when the world demands you close your eyes, curiosity is a sacred act. Keep looking up, keep asking why, and trust, as Galileo did, that truth, like starlight, travels far and arrives long after the source has faded. The microscope. Let's shrink for a moment, down, down, to a world within a world, where a drop of water holds entire kingdoms and the unseen hums with life. Tonight, we follow the story of a man who peered into the invisible, a draper with no formal schooling, who ground glass into windows to the infinite. This is the tale of Antony van Leeuwenhoek and the tiny lenses that unveiled the universe hiding in plain sight. Born in 1632, in the bustling Dutch city of Delft, Antony was not a scholar. He ran a fabric shop, measuring silk and wool by day, his calloused hands brushing against magnifying glasses used to count threads. But Antony's mind, curious as a child's, wandered. What if, he wondered, these lenses could see beyond cloth? What secrets might lurk in a raindrop or a fleck of dust? With no teacher but obsession, he began grinding lenses late into the night, long after the shop's shutters closed. His tools were simple: a furnace, a grindstone, and a patience as vast as the sea. While scholars of his time used crude microscopes, Antony crafted lenses no thicker than a grain of rice, yet so precise they magnified 300 times. Each one took months, his eyes straining, fingers blistered, until the glass curved like a tear. He mounted them in brass, tiny portals to realms no human had ever seen. But when he shared his work, the learned men of London's Royal Society scoffed. A shopkeeper? They sneered. What could he discover that we have not? Undeterred, Antony turned his lenses on everything. A drop of pond water, teeming with animalcules, tiny creatures darting and spinning like dancers. The plaque from his own teeth, alive with writhing threads. Even blood, pulsing with red globes. He wrote letters to the Royal Society, his words trembling with awe, describing little eels and glorious creatures in a single mouthful of rainwater. The scholars blinked, disbelieving. How could life exist where none was thought to be? They sent envoys to verify his claims, certain he was a fraud or a madman. Yet, when they peered through his lenses, the truth was undeniable. The world, they realized, was not silent or still. It thrummed everywhere, with life too small to see. Antony, now dubbed the father of microbiology, became a sensation, but fame sat awkwardly on his shoulders. He preferred his quiet workshop, his lenses, and the thrill of discovery. For 50 years, he wrote over 500 letters to the Royal Society, each a love letter to the unseen. He found sperm cells in semen, bacteria in vinegar, and capillaries in fishtails, completing the puzzle of blood circulation. All this from a man who never left Delft and spoke only Dutch. But acceptance came slowly. For years, his claims were met with suspicion. Fellow scientists demanded proof. Rulers asked him to inspect their tears, and priests accused him of heresy. If God wanted us to see these creatures, they argued, he would have made them larger. Antony, ever stubborn, simply polished another lens. The truth, he wrote, is my only compass. He worked until his last days, at 91, his hands still steady, his wonder undimmed. When he died, he left 247 microscopes and boxes of lenses, each a key to a door he'd opened but never fully stepped through. What can we learn from this quiet draper who saw giants in the infinitesimal? That curiosity needs no diploma, no grand lab, just a willingness to look closer. That the world is layered with miracles, hidden in the mundane, waiting for a patient eye. When life feels small, when you feel overlooked, remember Antony's lenses. Your struggles, your doubts, your daily grind, they are not trivial. They are the friction that polishes something extraordinary, if only you keep looking. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those tiny animalcules swirling in a droplet, unseen for millennia, until one man's persistence gave them a stage. Let them remind you, even the smallest among us, the quietest, the most dismissed, hold universes within. And sometimes the grandest truths begin with a whisper, a question, a single lens held up to the light. The telephone. Let's journey back to a time when words traveled slowly, carried by ink or whispered across wires as coded clicks. A time when the human voice, rich with laughter, longing, and love, could not leap across mountains or seas. Tonight, we unravel the story of a man who wove sound into wire, Alexander Graham Bell, and the heartbeat moment when his name and another's nearly slipped into history's shadows. Born in 1847, Bell was a man haunted by sound. His mother, slowly growing deaf, taught him to see music in vibrations. His father, a speech therapist, trained him to dissect words, to heal the silence between them. But Bell dreamed of a grander alchemy, to capture the human voice itself and hurl it across distances. In cluttered Boston workshops, he tinkered with harmonic telegraphs, devices humming with reeds and wires, while a rival inventor, Elisha Gray, raced toward the same horizon. The year was 1876, and the race was a tango of sparks and near misses. Bell, gaunt from sleepless nights, and Gray, a seasoned engineer, circled the same truth, that voices could ride electric currents. But time, that fickle referee, would crown only one. On February 14th, as snow dusted the streets of Washington, Bell's lawyer hurried to the patent office, clutching a sketch of a speaking telegraph. Hours later, Gray's lawyer arrived with a near-identical claim. The difference? A handful of minutes, and the quirk of fate that inks one name into eternity and folds another into footnotes. 3 days later, Bell stood in his attic, a spill of acid on his trousers, a crude transmitter pressed to his lips. "Mr. Watson," he breathed, "come here. I want to see you." Through the wall, his assistant, Thomas Watson, startled at the words crackling through wire. The first telephone call, a stumble of shock and joy. Yet, victory tasted bittersweet. Gray's design, some whispered, held secrets Bell might have borrowed. Lawsuits swirled. But history's gears had already turned. The world, hungry for connection, embraced the telephone, while Gray faded into the periphery, his almost etched in quiet sorrow. Bell's invention bloomed, a symphony of switchboards and copper lines, stitching continents with voices. He became rich, revered, yet restless. He founded schools for the deaf, invented metal detectors, even dreamed of flight. But he never forgot the fragile thread of chance that separated his name from Gray's. "When one door closes," he often said, "another opens." But we so often look so long upon the closed door that we do not see the one which is opened. What lingers in this tale of two inventors and the clock's cruel whisper? That triumph and obscurity often dance on the edge of a moment. That every yes we celebrate is shadowed by 1,000 almosts. But here lies the quiet truth. Bell's legacy isn't just a patent or a device. It's the reminder that every voice matters, that connection is worth chasing, even when the odds are a chorus of no. When you face your own near misses, your own closed doors, remember Bell's attic, the acid stain, the trembling wire. Progress is not a straight line, but a mosaic of tries, failures, and stubborn hope. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first words humming through wire, a crackle of human magic. Let them remind you, your voice, however small, however shaky, carries. Speak, reach, dare. And if the door closes, listen for the whisper of the one creaking open just ahead. The camera. Imagine a world where memories faded like smoke, where faces dissolved into shadows, and the past lived only in fragile strokes of paint. Tonight, we slip into the story of two men who fought to trap light itself, to preserve time in a box. A tale of partnership, patience, and the bittersweet truth that some pioneers plant trees but never sit in their shade. It began in 1826 in a quiet French countryside. Nicéphore Niepce, a reclusive inventor, spread bitumen onto a pewter plate, placed it in a wooden box, and pointed it at his courtyard. For 8 hours, sunlight etched the scene onto the plate. Blurry rooftops, a pigeon coop, a pear tree's ghostly silhouette. The first photograph, a heliograph, born of tar and sunbeams. But Niepce's triumph was fragile. His images faded. His process slow as molasses. For a decade, he tinkered alone, burning through savings, ignored by a world that saw no use for sun drawings. Then came Louis Daguerre, a showman and painter of Parisian dioramas, enchanted by Niepce's flickering dream. The two joined forces, but their partnership was unequal. Daguerre, charismatic, polished the rough edges of Niepce's invention. Niepce, now aging, shared his secrets, but died in 1833, penniless, his name slipping into obscurity. Daguerre inherited the puzzle, and for years he toiled in secrecy, poisoning himself with mercury fumes, coating silvered plates with iodine, chasing permanence. Until one day in 1837, he fixed an image of his studio, a broom, a shell, a pair of scales crisp as frost. The daguerreotype was born. Daguerre, unlike Niepce, understood spectacle. He unveiled his invention to the French Academy in 1839, calling it a gift to the world. Crowds gasped at portraits sharper than mirrors, landscapes frozen in silver. Governments showered him with pensions, his name etched into every camera. Niepce, forgotten, his grave unmarked, his courtyard pear tree rotted to dust. Yet, Daguerre's glory was haunted. His process, built on Niepce's trials, owed everything to the man who died too soon. And even Daguerre's triumph flickered. Within years, newer technologies eclipsed his plates, his name fading like an old photograph. But the seed had been planted, and the world, now armed with cameras, began to see differently. Wars were documented, families preserved, history stopped slipping away. What whispers linger in this tale of two inventors? That legacy is not always fair or kind. Niepce, the quiet dreamer, never saw his spark ignite the blaze. Daguerre, the showman, reaped applause he didn't fully sow. But together, they taught us this: creation is a relay, not a race. The baton passes, sometimes invisibly, from hand to hand. When you pour your heart into a project, when doubt whispers, "Why bother?" remember Niepce's lonely workshop. The sun crawling across his plate. Your work, your love, your unseen toil might be the foundation of someone else's cathedral. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first photographs, their ghostly shapes blooming in chemical baths. Let them remind you, not all contributions are signed, not all heroes are celebrated, but every step, no matter how small, etches something permanent into the universe. Your today might be someone else's once upon a time. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams, like Niepce's stubborn light, linger long after the shutter closes. And may you trust that even unseen, your work develops in ways you may never witness, but will always matter. The spectacles. Close your eyes and imagine a world blurred at the edges, where scribes squinted at parchments, Weavers lost threads in haze, and elders retreated from crafts they once loved. Tonight, we trace the story of a simple yet profound invention, one that sharpened the world's edges, not in a flash, but through centuries of quiet tinkering. A story where the heroes are unnamed, the origin disputed, but the impact crystal clear. So, long before opticians or prescriptions, vision was a sentence. The ancient Romans peered through glass globes filled with water. Arab scholars laid fragments of quartz over texts. Medieval monks balanced reading stones on manuscripts, their hands trembling as light bent through rock. But it wasn't until the 13th century, in the shadow of Venetian glassblowers' furnaces, that the puzzle pieces began to fit. A man named Salvino Darmate, or so some stories claim, ground 2 small lenses, set them in frames, and perched them on his nose. The first spectacles, a bridge between eye and page. But history, like an old lens, is fogged with debate. Salvino's tale is unverified, his grave lost, his name etched only in a crumbling Florentine ledger. What's certain? That spectacles bloomed in Italy's workshops, crafted by anonymous hands, refined by monks, merchants, and mothers desperate to thread needles again. Early adopters were mocked, called eyeglass pedants, their faces pinched by frames of bone or leather. Yet, slowly, the world began to see the light. For centuries, lenses were crude, curved by guesswork. Each pair was a gamble, too weak, too strong, too heavy on the bridge. Artisans guarded glass recipes like alchemy, while scholars like Roger Bacon theorized about light's secrets but couldn't bend them to order. Progress inched forward, a stumble of trial and error. Then, in 1784, Benjamin Franklin, weary of swapping lenses for near and far, sliced 2 pairs in half, fused them, and created bifocals, a small fix, born of frustration that let aging eyes read clocks and love letters. Still, spectacles remained a luxury until factories in the 1800s spun lenses by the thousands, and optometry became a science. Today, sleek frames perch on noses worldwide, correcting astigmatism. Salvino, if he existed, died unknown. The monks, glassblowers, and tinkerers, their fingerprints linger only in the light that passes through their creations. What wisdom gleams from these lenses? That few revolutions arrive with a bang. Most unfold softly, like a blurred page coming into focus. That progress is a chorus, not a solo, built by countless voices murmuring, "What if?" When your own efforts feel small, when your name goes unspoken. Remember the anonymous hands that carved the first lenses. The world is shaped not only by those who take credit, but by those who simply hand the next person a sharper tool. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first spectacles, their glass smudged with fingerprints, their frames rough as unpolished stone. Let them remind you, clarity, in sight or in life, is rarely instant. It's a slow turning of gears, a patient grinding, a gift passed silently from one generation to the next. And even if your contribution goes unsigned, trust that it steadies someone else's gaze, helping them see further, dream brighter, and navigate a world made just a little kinder by your unseen hand. The paper. Let's drift back to an age when words were heavy, carved into bamboo, or whispered onto silk too precious to touch. A time when knowledge was locked in the hands of the wealthy, and the world ached for a lighter way to speak. Tonight, we follow the story of Kai Lun, a quiet visionary who turned rags and bark into a revolution and faced a storm of doubt to change how humanity remembers itself. In 2nd century China, under the Han Dynasty's golden haze, scholars etched laws onto bamboo strips, clattering, clumsy scrolls that filled carts. Emperors wrote on silk, smooth as moonlight, but costly as jewels. Then came Kai Lun, a court official with ink-stained sleeves and a restless mind. Why, he wondered, must wisdom weigh so much? He dreamed of a material as light as a leaf, as sturdy as wood, yet gentle enough to cradle a poet's brushstroke. For years, he experimented, shredding mulberry bark, hemp, old fishing nets, even rags discarded by weavers. He pounded them into pulp, strained them through bamboo screens, and pressed them flat. The first sheets were rough, speckled with fibers, but they held ink, paper. Yet when he presented it to the court, the scholars scoffed. "Bamboo has dignity," they declared. "Silk has grace. This rag is fit only for wrapping fish." Even the emperor hesitated, loyal to the rustle of bamboo strips, the shimmer of silk. Kai Lun's workshops burned twice, some say by rivals clinging to the old ways. He was mocked, called a madman of waste for turning cloth into pulp. But he persisted, refining his recipe, adding lotus fibers for softness, starch for smoothness. Slowly, secretly, paper seeped into daily life. Merchants used it for ledgers, monks for sutras, lovers for letters folded into sleeves. It was cheaper than silk, lighter than bamboo, and in time, even the court relented. Edicts were stamped on paper, crisp and official, and the clatter of bamboo carts faded into memory. But Kai Lun's triumph was bittersweet. Accused of treason in his later years, he drank poison rather than face disgrace. Yet his invention outran his name. Paper slipped beyond China's borders, cradling the Quran on its journey west, cradling Dante's verses in Florence, cradling the first whispers of the printed word. Today, his likeness fades from history books, but every page, every diary, every origami crane carries his fingerprint. What lingers in this tale of rags and resilience? That progress often wears humble clothes, and the greatest revolutions begin as something the world dismisses as trash. When your own ideas meet crossed arms, when tradition barks, "This is how it's always been," remember Kai Lun's shredded nets, his stubborn pulp. Change is a quiet guest. It knocks softly, but once let in, it rearranges the furniture of the world. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first sheets of paper drying in the sun, their fibers holding stories yet to be written. Let them remind you, even the faintest voice scribbled on something fragile can outlast empires. And the next time you crumple a page, pause, feel its weightless strength. It is proof that from scraps, patience, and a little defiance, we can build bridges across time. The clock. Let's journey back to an age when time was a dance of shadows, measured by sundials or whispered by dripping water. A time when the heavens dictated life's rhythm and human hands trembled to tame it. Tonight, we wander through the story of gears and stars, of monks and scholars, and the mechanical heartbeat that taught the world to count its breaths, one tick at a time. Long before clocks adorned towers, timekeeping was a sacred art. In ancient monasteries, monks rose for prayer by the moon's glow. Their chants synced to water clocks that often lagged or froze. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars bent over astrolabes, calculating prayer times from the sun's arc, their faces pressed to parchment. But the dream of precision lingered, a hunger to slice eternity into perfect, measurable slices. In 14th century England, a Benedictine monk named Richard of Wallingford, frail from leprosy, scribbled designs in a dim cloister. His hands shook, but his mind soared. He envisioned a clock not just to mark hours, but to map the stars, predict eclipses, and ring bells with celestial precision. For 30 years, he labored, carving gears from iron, programming the heavens into a maze of cogs. His masterpiece, the Albion, was a marvel, a clock that charted the moon's phases, the tides, even the wobble of the earth. But Richard died before hearing its first tick, his creation finished by trembling hands, its bells tolling over a grave he'd never see. Meanwhile, far to the east, Islamic scholars had already woven time into metal. In the 9th century, the Abbasid caliphs commissioned water clocks so ornate they chimed with mechanical birds and opened doors to reveal tiny nights. By the 13th century, Al-Jazari, an engineer whose name means the resourceful, crafted elephant-shaped clocks with serpents that coiled and sang. These weren't mere tools, but acts of devotion, aligning daily prayers with cosmic order. Yet, like Richard's clock, they demanded sacrifice. Al-Jazari's manuscripts hint at sleepless nights, gears jammed with sand, and rulers impatient for miracles. The mechanical clock, born of both prayer and pragmatism, faced resistance. Traditionalists called it hubris. How dare man cage time, they cried. Farmers clung to the sun's cadence, sailors to the stars. But slowly, the tick of gears conquered. In European town squares, clock towers rose, their faces peering over markets, regimenting labor, shifting when the sun is high to at 3 o'clock. In mosques, muezzins no longer squinted at shadows, but trusted clockwork to summon the faithful. Time, once fluid as a river, hardened into grids, and humanity learned to race against it. Yet this precision came at a cost. Artisans hunched over tiny springs, their eyesight failing. Villages split between those who lived by the clock and those who resented its tyranny. Richard's dream of harmonizing heaven and earth gave way to factory whistles, to minutes counted like coins. Still, the clock's legacy hums in our veins, in every heartbeat synced to deadlines, in every pause for prayer or breath. What wisdom ticks within these ancient gears? That time is both a compass and a cage, a rhythm to revere, not just race against. The monks and scholars who carved these clocks, they understood balance between celestial wonder and earthly toil, between prayer and productivity. When your own days feel fractured, when the clock's whisper becomes a shemt, remember Richard's star-charting machine, Al-Jazari's singing elephants. Time is not your master, but a river you navigate. Let some moments stretch like honey, others fall crisp as autumn leaves. And in the quiet, listen for the older rhythms, the moon's pull, the breath between ticks, the sacred pause that no gear can measure. Tonight, As you drift into sleep, imagine those first clocks, their hands turning like planets, their bells ringing across centuries. Let them remind you, you are not a slave to the tick, but its steward. Cherish the hours. But never let them blind you to the infinite, to the timeless spaces between seconds, where dreams and stillness live. The calendar. Let's drift back to a world where time itself was tangled, where spring festivals arrived in winter and harvest moons waxed out of season, a world fractured by competing rhythms until a pope dared to mend the sundial of the heavens, only to find that even time, when altered, can spark rebellion. This is the story of the Gregorian calendar and the centuries it took to stitch the world into sync. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII gazed at a universe askew. The old Julian calendar, crafted by Caesar's astronomers, had drifted like a ship lost at sea. Over 1,600 years, its tiny error, 11 minutes a year, had snowballed. Easter, the holiest of feasts, now risked spilling into summer. For Gregory, this wasn't just mathematics. It was divine order. So he gathered astronomers, clipped 10 days from October, and introduced leap years to anchor time. But the world, steeped in habit, balked. Catholic nations like Spain and Italy embraced the change, waking on October 15th as if October 5th had never existed. Yet Protestant lands recoiled. "Why let a pope dictate our days?" they hissed. In England, pamphlets declared the new calendar a popish plot. Preachers warned it stole days from God's creation. For 170 years, Britain clung to the Julian rhythm, its people living 11 days adrift from neighbors. Merchants double-dating letters, farmers sowing seeds to a different sky. The East resisted longer. Orthodox churches, guarding ancient traditions, saw Gregory's reform as heresy. In Russia, the Julian calendar held until 1918, plunging the country into chaos. When the Bolsheviks finally cut 13 days, riots erupted. People howled that their lives were stolen. Landlords demanded rent for vanished dates, and the October Revolution, now memorialized in November, became a ghost of its own name. Even beyond faith, practicality bred defiance. Swedish scientists once tried a double leap year fix, but botched the math, leaving the nation adrift for 40 years. Alpine villages, synced to milking seasons, ignored dates entirely. Time, it seemed, was not a universal language, but a dialect, stubbornly local. What whispers linger in this tug-of-war over days? That change, even when rational, must contend with the human heart. A calendar is more than numbers. It's memory, ritual, identity. To erase days is to erase a piece of who we are. Yet Gregory's vision, patient as a pendulum, endured. Today, his calendar governs global markets, flights, the pixelated clocks on our screens. Those 11 minutes, once so divisive, now bind us in invisible unison. So what wisdom ticks here? That progress and tradition are not foes, but partners in a slow dance. When faced with change, we are all a little like 18th century Londoners, clutching our familiar rhythms, fearful of lost days. But time, in its endless turn, teaches this. Resistance is natural, adaptation is inevitable, and harmony, however delayed, finds its way. The Gregorian calendar didn't conquer, it conversed. The world bent with it. Tonight, As you drift into sleep, imagine those vanished October days, floating like unmoored boats. Let them remind you, all great shifts begin with friction. Your own life, your seasons of change, may meet storms of no. But time, that gentle alchemist, softens even the hardest never into not yet, and not yet into now. The vaccination. Let's wander back to a world haunted by shadows, where parents tucked children into bed, not with lullabies, but with prayers they'd survive the night. A world where faces were scarred by grief as much as by pox, and hope wore thin as gauze. Tonight, we trace the story of a country doctor, a man who turned folklore into salvation and faced a storm of fear to give humanity its first true shield, the vaccine. In 18th century England, smallpox was a reaper. It claimed 1 in 3 lives, left survivors blinded, scarred, hollowed. Mothers brushed pustules with goose feathers, desperate to protect their children with a trace of the disease itself. But Edward Jenner, a gentle physician from Gloucestershire, noticed something curious. Milkmaids, their hands weathered by chores, rarely bore smallpox's marks. They catch cowpox, farmer shrugged, a mild cousin from udders. To Jenner, this wasn't trivia. It was a key. For years, he listened, studied, and dared to dream. What if cowpox, harmless to humans, could arm the body against its deadly kin? In 1796, he tested his theory. From a milkmaid's sore, he scraped pus and inoculated James Phipps, his gardener's son. The boy fell mildly ill, then recovered. Weeks later, Jenner exposed him to smallpox itself. The result? Nothing. Immunity, born not from danger, but from a cow's gentle gift. Yet, the world recoiled. Cartoonists drew patients sprouting horns. Preachers called it unnatural. Doctors sneered, will not be governed by dairy tales. Pamphlets warned of bovine mutations. Mothers clutched children tighter. Jenner, once respected, faced mockery and threats. He wrote, "The greater the ignorance, the greater the dogmatism." Still, he persisted. He called his method vaccination, from vacca, Latin for cow, and offered it freely, refusing to profit from pain. Slowly, the tide turned. Orphans, sailors, even a queen embraced the cure. By the 1800s, his vaccine crossed oceans, carried in threads soaked in cowpox serum, passed arm to arm, a living chain of hope. Yet Jenner, ever humble, never saw the full harvest. He died in 1823, his epitaph silent on his greatest triumph. It took 184 years, but in 1980, smallpox, humanity's ancient scourge, was erased from the earth. What lingers in this tale of udders and urgency? That progress often wears a disguise, that answers hide in plain sight, if we dare to look. Jenner's genius wasn't just science. It was listening to farmers, to mothers, to the quiet truths whispered by everyday life. When faced with fear, with "this is how it's always been," remember his courage. Innovation is not a roar, but a ripple, a small act of trust that swells into a wave. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first vaccines, gliding like whispers under skin. Let them remind you. Even the fiercest storms begin with a single breeze. Your own acts of faith, however small, however met with doubt, might one day be the shield someone needs. And when the world resists, as it always does, take heart. The same species that once feared cowpox now holds the power to rewrite its own destiny. The antiseptics. Let's step back into a time when hospitals smelled of death, where surgeons wore blood-stained aprons like badges of honor, and a simple scrape could spiral into a grave. Tonight, we follow the story of a man who dared to wash his hands, to question the invisible, and faced scorn to turn medicine from butchery into healing. This is the tale of Joseph Lister and the quiet revolution of antiseptics. In the 1860s, surgery was a gamble. Patients survived the knife, only to succumb to hospital fever, their wounds oozing pus, their bodies burning with sepsis. Surgeons scoffed at cleanliness. Laudable pus was a sign of healing, they claimed. But Lister, a soft-spoken Scotsman, noticed a pattern. Broken bones that pierced skin often festered, while those that didn't healed cleanly. What if, he wondered, invisible poisons linger in the air, on tools, on hands? The answer came from an unlikely source. In Carlisle, workers used carbolic acid to tame the stench of waste. Lister, recalling Louis Pasteur's germ theory, wondered if the same chemical could kill the unseen killers in wounds. He soaked bandages in carbolic, sprayed it in operating theaters, and scrubbed his hands raw. The results stunned. Patients survived. Infections dwindled. But when he shared his findings, the medical world erupted in outrage. Ugh! Surgeons mocked him as the mad washerman. Colleagues sneered. Germs? Fairy tales. They clung to the old ways. Saws crusted with blood. Silk threads stored in pockets. Pride thicker than grime. One doctor jeered, "Why wash? A gentleman's hands are never dirty." Lister, ever patient, wrote letters, demonstrated his methods, and endured lectures where students hurled insults like confetti. Even his allies wavered. Nurses hated the acid's sting, patients winced at its smell, and hospitals balked at the cost. But Lister persisted, refining his potions, trading carbolic for milder brews. Slowly, the tide turned. In Germany, his methods found fervent followers. In 1877, he became a professor in London, scrubbing the surgical theater floor himself to prove a point. By the 1890s, antiseptics seeped into practice, and survival rates soared. Yet, Lister's triumph was shadowed by irony. He never sought fame and hated the term Listerism. When he died in 1912, his obituaries praised him, but the world had already moved on to newer miracles. Still, every sterile bandage, every surgeon's scrub, every bottle of disinfectant hums with his legacy. And what lingers in this story of soap and stubbornness? That truth, no matter how obvious in hindsight, often begins as heresy. Lister's battle wasn't just against germs, but against ego, tradition, and the human fear of the unseen. When your own ideas meet crossed arms, when the world insists, this is how it's always been, remember his carbolic sprays, his quiet resolve. Progress is not a spotlight, but a candle, passed hand to hand, often in the dark. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first sterile bandages, their harsh scent a hymn to hope. Let them remind you, even the smallest act of care, a washed hand, a cleaned wound, a whispered truth, can ripple into salvation. And though the world may resist your invisible truths, hold fast, The future belongs not to the loudest, but to those who tend patiently to the quiet work of healing. The sewing machine. Let's slip back to a world of aching fingers and candlelit nights, where every stitch in a dress, every seam in a shirt was drawn by hand. A world where fabric piled in corners and mothers hunched for hours, their eyes strained, their dreams fraying like thread. Tonight, we follow the story of Elias Howe, a man who dreamed of freeing hands from the needle's tyranny, only to find his own creation stitched into a web of betrayal, and the long fight to reclaim what was his. In the 1840s, Howe, a shy mechanic from Massachusetts, watched his wife's fingers bleed as she sewed. He vowed to build a machine that could mimic her deft movements, but faster. Tireless, for years, he tinkered in a cramped workshop, plagued by whispers of impossible. His breakthrough came in a dream. Visions of spears with holes near their tips, a clue to the lock stitch. By 1846, he patented a machine with a needle that pierced cloth, leaving a loop for a second thread. The sewing machine was born. Clattering, revolutionary, and instantly ignored. Factories scoffed. Tailors feared for their jobs. Howe, penniless, sailed to England, hawking his invention to corset makers. But across the ocean, men like Isaac Singer, sharp-eyed and shrewd, spotted gold in his design. They copied his needle, tweaked his shuttle, and mass-produced machines that hummed with stolen genius. When Howe returned, bankrupt and grieving his wife's death, he found 100 singers in every shop, stitching fortunes from his fingerprints. Illegal battles began. Howe, a ghost in his own story, sued. Lawyers sneered. "Prove it's yours!" He dug up his patent, dusted off blueprints, and faced Singer in court. For years, they dueled, not with wrenches, but words. Singer's team mocked Howe's clumsy machine, but the truth gleamed in the details. The eye at the needle's tip, the dance of thread and shuttle. In 1854, the courts ruled every sewing machine in America owed Howe royalties, $5 per machine, a river of gold from a man who'd once begged for bread. Yet, victory tasted bittersweet. Singer's empire thrived, his name synonymous with sewing, while Howe faded into footnotes. He died in 1867, wealthy but weary, his obituary a paragraph in the shadow of giants. Still, his legacy hums in every factory, every quilt stitched at midnight, every child's uniform sewn by machine. The needle he designed, unchanged in its essence, still pierces cloth, still bears his silent signature. What threads of wisdom weave through this tale? That creation is only half the battle. The rest is guarding the flame. Howe's genius wasn't just the machine, but the grit to reclaim it, stitch by legal stitch. When your own work is borrowed, when credit slips away, remember his courtroom whispers, his stubborn ledgers. The world may forget your name, but never your mark. And sometimes, justice is a slow seam, painstaking, but unbreakable. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first sewing machines, their wheels spinning like fate, their threads tangling, then holding fast. Let them remind you, every great invention, every act of courage begins as a fragile idea, easily snapped. But with patience, with resolve, it can mend the world and outlast even the loudest thief. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams, like Howe's needle, find their perfect stitch, turning struggle into strength and memory into something that endures long after the last thread is cut. The typewriter. Let's wander back to a world of ink-stained fingers, of quills that snapped and letters that smudged in the rain. A world where words moved at the pace of a weary hand, until a printer's son from Wisconsin dared to mechanize thought itself. Tonight, we follow the clatter and stumble of Christopher Latham Scholes, the man who rearranged the alphabet, not for poetry, but to tame a machine's tantrums, and in doing so, rewrote how humanity speaks. In the 1860s, Scholes, a newspaper editor with ink in his veins, grew frustrated with slow, messy handwriting. He dreamed of a machine that could stamp letters as swiftly as the mind could conjure them. With two tinkerers, Carlos Glidden and Samuel Soleil, he cobbled together a wooden contraption, a typewriter. Its keys like piano notes for prose. But early models were stubborn. Press two keys quickly, and metal arms tangled, snarling in midair like fighting crows. The solution? A keyboard that slowed the hands, spacing common letters apart. QWERTY, a nonsensical jumble, was born not from logic, but from necessity, a dance of compromise. Yet the world yawned. The first typewriters sold in 1874 were dismissed as novelties. Clerks sneered, "Why learn this when pen and paper work fine?" Writers found it clunky, its clack disrupting quiet minds. Mark Twain, though an early adopter, griped that it curdled his sentences. Scholes himself grew doubtful, selling his patent for a pittance, never foreseeing the revolution he'd sparked. For decades, the typewriter gathered dust in office corners, a relic of too much haste. But slowly, the machine found its voice. Secretaries, mostly women entering the workforce, mastered QWERTY's quirks, their fingers flying faster than any pen. Offices buzzed with productivity. Novels like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer flowed from typed pages, and the rhythm of progress quickened. Scholes, by then an old man, lived just long enough to see his invention begin to thrive. Though his name rarely graced the headlines, he died in 1890, his keyboard etched into history, his doubts forgotten in the staccato song of 1,000 keys. What whispers linger in QWERTY's asymmetrical rows? That perfection is rarely the first step, but a detour through chaos. Scholes didn't set out to design a legend. He solved a jam, and in doing so, laid tracks for a new world. When your own ideas meet resistance, when critics call your compromises clumsy, remember the typewriter's truth. Innovation is messy. It stutters, tangles, and slows us down, until one day it becomes the bedrock of the ordinary. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first keystrokes, the hesitant click-clack of a machine learning its voice. Let it remind you, even the strangest choices, born of frustration or failure, can shape centuries. Your own QWERTY moments, awkward, imperfect, misunderstood, might yet become the quiet framework of someone else's leap. The refrigeration. Let's drift back to a time when summer's bounty turned to rot by autumn, when milk soured in the pantry and ice was carved from frozen lakes, only to melt into puddles by spring. A world where hunger and waste danced hand in hand, until a quiet German engineer named Karl von Linde asked, "What if cold could travel?" Tonight, we unravel the story of how a whisper of frost, tamed by human hands, rewrote the rhythm of nourishment and cradled the world in a chill that saved lives. In the 19th century, Food was a fleeting guest, meat spoiled, fruits fermented, and children fell ill from invisible poisons in spoiled meals. Iceboxes filled with dwindling blocks hauled from distant winters were luxuries for the few. Carl von Linde, a professor with ice in his gaze and steam in his veins, saw the toll of this fragility. Cold, he mused, should not be a prisoner of seasons, but how to capture it, to make it bend to human will. For years, he wrestled with vapors and valves. Early refrigerators were hulking beasts, fueled by toxic gases, prone to explosions. Undeterred, Linde scribbled equations by lamplight, seeking a safer, simpler way. In 1876, his answer came: a compressor that harnessed ammonia, cycling it in a closed dance of expansion and contraction. Cold became a tool, portable, reliable, a quiet revolution in steel and copper. His machine hummed to life, and with it, the promise of perpetual winter. Yet the world hesitated. Farmers eyed the contraption with suspicion. Butchers clung to salt and smoke. Housewives whispered, "Why fix what God ordained?" Linde's cold was met with colder shoulders. But pioneers pressed on. Ships once laden with rotting meat now carried chilled cargo across oceans. Hospitals stored serums without fear, and children sipped fresh milk in July. Slowly, the iceboxes drip, 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 gave way to the refrigerator's steady hum, a lullaby of safety. Linde, ever the quiet scholar, did not rest. He refined his designs, turned ammonia to safer gases, and watched as his invention slipped from factories to kitchens, from steamships to street carts. By the time he died in 1934, the world had shifted. Seasons no longer dictated survival, and the once luxury of cold became a silent guardian in every home. What frost-kissed wisdom lingers here? That progress often begins as a whisper, a stubborn refusal to accept this is how it is. Linde's genius wasn't just in pipes and pressure, but in seeing the invisible, the families spared from hunger, the lives unbroken by decay. When your own challenges seem insurmountable, when tradition murmurs, stay, remember his relentless chill. The future belongs to those who dare to preserve, to protect, to reimagine the ordinary into the extraordinary. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine Linde's first machine, its coils glinting like frozen lace, its breath a steady sigh of safety. Let it remind you, even the coldest struggles, met with patience, can thaw into warmth. And sometimes, the quietest inventions, those that hum in the background, are the ones that hold the world together. The washing machine. Let's drift back to a time when laundry day meant blistered hands, riverside stones, and the endless slap of wet cloth on washboards. A world where the chore of cleanliness weighed heavy, especially on women, their hours swallowed by suds and scrubbing. Tonight, we follow the story of a humble invention, born not in a single stroke of genius, but in the quiet persistence of countless hands. A tale of ripples that became a wave, and the washing machine's long journey from dream to daily comfort. In the mid-1800s, James King, a shadowy figure from Virginia, etched a design onto paper: a wooden drum, a hand crank, a way to mimic the motion of washing by hand, but with gears instead of sinew. His 1851 patent was a whisper of what could be: a clunky cylinder that asked muscles to turn its wheels. It was not yet a revolution, but a seed, one of many planted by anonymous minds. For centuries, tinkerers had tried, from ancient wash basins to medieval plungers, each adding a stitch to the fabric of an idea. Ting's machine, like others of its time, was a beginning. Housewives peered at its crank, skeptics called it a gentleman's folly, and laundry still demanded sweat. But in sheds and cellars, unsung inventors tinkered. A mother added paddles. A blacksmith swapped wood for iron. A clerk dreamed of steam. Progress was a patchwork, stitched by farmers, seamstresses, and mechanics whose names faded like ink in the rain. They traded no patents, claimed no fame, only the quiet hope of easing a shared burden. Decades unfurled. The hand crank gave way to gasoline, then electricity, the drum spinning faster, the water heating on its own. By the 20th century, the machine began to hum, no longer a curiosity, but a fixture in homes. Yet, its evolution never ceased. A factory worker tweaked the wringer, an engineer balanced the load, a war widow devised a timer, each tweak small as a button, woven into the loom of daily life. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the rhythm of those early machines, their cranks creaking like lullabies. Let them remind you, even the simplest comforts are built on lifetimes of trial, of silent toil, of ordinary magic. And as your mind rings out the day's worries, remember, you too are part of this endless, beautiful human dance of making. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams, like the ageless spin of the wash cycle, turn effort into ease, and remind you that every small turn, in time, changes the world. The fan. Let's drift back to a time when summer's breath lay heavy on the world, when heat pooled in parlors, clung to skin, and turned sleep into a restless dance. A time before the whisper of electric breeze, when ice blocks melted into puddles, and palm leaf fans snapped like tired moths. Tonight, we follow the story of Schuyler Wheeler, a man who turned a simple spin of wire and blade into a symphony of relief and reminded us that even the smallest inventions can stir the winds of change. In the late 1800s, as cities sweltered under soot-stained skies, Wheeler, a quiet engineer from New York, watched clerks wilt at their desks, mothers fanning fevered brows, workers fainting in factory steam. He dreamed of a machine to mimic nature's breath, a controlled wind, summoned with a switch. But how? Others had tried, clunky hand-cranked fans, ceiling contraptions rigged to water wheels. Wheeler's idea was daringly simple. Pair Thomas Edison's young electric motor with 2 spinning blades. No gears, no pulleys, just copper wire, steel, and the hum of possibility. In 1882, he unveiled his electric fan, a modest twin-bladed device perched on a base. It whirred to life with a flick, spinning air into a gentle torrent. Skeptics scoffed. Why not just open a window? They huffed. Electricity is for light, not breezes. But Wheeler, ever patient, knew better. He installed fans in Edison's labs, where engineers sighed as sweat dried on their necks, in Wall Street offices where ink stopped smudging ledgers, and in hospitals where the cool air soothed fevered patients. Slowly, the world leaned into the relief. Yet the road was uneven. Early motors sparked, blades wobbled, and only the wealthy could afford such luxuries. Wheeler refined his design, trading twin blades for a single efficient whirl, encasing motors to mute their growl. By the 1890s, his fans hummed in department stores, theaters, and eventually, living rooms. The electric fan, once a novelty, became a herald of modernity, its breeze crossing class and continent. What of Wheeler? He never sought fame, patenting his fan quietly, then fading into the backdrop of history. He died in 1923, as ceiling fans spun in tropical colonies, as desk fans cooled typewriter keys, as children giggled in the artificial wind. His name, unlike Edison's, rarely graced the devices, but his legacy lingered in every sigh of relief, every cooled brow, every night's rest, unbroken by heat's grip. What whispers rise from this tale of spinning steel? That greatness isn't always grand. Sometimes it's a quiet blade cutting through discomfort. Wheeler's fan didn't conquer a frontier, but it transformed daily life, proving that innovation isn't just about what we create, but who we comfort. When you face a problem, remember his lesson. Solutions need not be complex, just kind. A small fix, a gentle breeze, can ripple into a revolution of well-being. And tonight, as you drifting to sleep, imagine those first electric fans, their blades slicing the thick air of a gilded age, their hum a lullaby of progress. Let them remind you. Even the simplest acts, a breath of cool air, a word of comfort, a moment's pause, can be sacred. And the next time you feel a breeze, whether from a window, a fan, or a loved one's sigh, remember, it carries the echo of 1,000 small kindnesses, spinning silently through time. The plow. Let's journey back to a time when fields were carved by hand, when seeds scattered like hopes on unyielding earth, and hunger loomed as close as the next harvest. A world where farming was a gamble, until a man named Jethro Tull, with mud on his boots and rebellion in his mind, dared to rethink the ancient dance between soil and plow. Tonight, we wander through the story of a tool that turned dirt into destiny and furrowed the path for modern abundance. In the early 1700s, England's fields groaned under the weight of tradition. Farmers sowed seeds by flinging them into the wind, trusting luck to nestle them in the earth. Plows, little more than crooked sticks dragged by oxen, scratched the soil's surface, leaving riches buried deep below. Tull, a lawyer turned farmer, watched his crops fail, his neighbors starve, and wondered, what if we could dig deeper, plant smarter, make the land speak? His answer began with a horse's hoof, observing how hoofs broke soil better than plows. He sketched a machine with iron teeth, a seed drill that planted rows with military precision. But his mind didn't stop there. He reimagined the plow itself, trading wood for iron, designing curved blades to slice through earth like a knife through butter. For years, he faced ridicule. Peers called him a fool. Iron will poison the soil, they cried, while others clung to the mantra, our fathers plowed this way, and so shall we. Tull's fields, meanwhile, flourished. His wheat stood taller, his turnip sweeter, his soil richer. Still, the world resisted, wedded to the old rhythms of scarcity. Undeterred, Tull wrote The Horse-Hoeing Husbandry, a manifesto of soil and science. He argued that roots needed air, that weeds stole life, that precision bred plenty. His plow, pulled by horses, cut deeper, turning hidden nutrients to the surface. Yet, Adoption crept like winter thaw. Farmers distrusted iron, feared debt, and doubted a lawyer's dirt-stained hands. It took decades, but slowly, the yields spoke. Fields once gaunt, now swelled with grain. And the old ways crumbled like parched earth. The ripple was profound. Tull's plow and his seed drill became keystones of the agricultural revolution. Villages that once teetered on famine now thrived. Populations bloomed. Cities rose on the back of full bellies, and the earth itself, long abused, began to heal under smarter stewardship. Yet Tull, ever the iconoclast, died in 1741. His name etched more in grudging respect than glory. His tools, not his tombstone, became his legacy. What wisdom sprouts from this furrow? That progress often wears muddy boots, that those who till the soil of innovation must also till hearts and habits. Tull's plow wasn't just metal and sweat, it was a challenge to see the land not as a master, but a partner. When faced with the way it's always been, remember his stubborn blade. Change, even when logical, must first cut through layers of fear, and sometimes the deepest resistance grows the richest harvest. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first iron plows glinting in the dawn, their blades parting the earth like a promise. Let them remind you, every field, every challenge holds hidden depths. Dig deeper, plant with care, and trust that even the smallest furrow over time can nourish 1,000 hungers. The world is shaped not by those who skim the surface, but by those willing to grip the handle and turn the soil of what's possible. The concrete. Let's drift back to a sun-dappled Parisian garden in the 1860s, where petals trembled in the breeze and clay flower pots cracked like eggshells under the weight of blooming roses. A world where beauty was fragile, until a gardener with dirt under his nails and stubbornness in his soul asked, what if roots could grow stronger than the soil? Tonight, we follow the story of Joseph Monnier, a man who turned frustration into fortitude and planted the seeds for skyscrapers while simply trying to save his flowers. Monnier, a tender of blossoms, grew weary of mending shattered pots. Clay split in frost, wood rotted in rain, and his prized orange trees outgrew their porcelain prisons. One day, as he patched yet another broken planter, he noticed something. Concrete, a humble mix of sand and lime, held shape but shattered under strain. Iron, rigid and unyielding, bent but rarely broke. What if, he mused, they could work together like veins in a leaf? In his cluttered shed, Monnier began weaving wire into mesh, like knitting a steel sweater. He molded concrete around it, let it cure, and waited. The result? A pot that flexed but held. A pot that laughed at frost, shrugged off roots, and cradled his orange trees like a mother's arms. In 1867, he patented his ciment armé, reinforced concrete. Though critics scoffed, engineers sneered, a gardener playing with pebbles. Architects dismissed it as a crutch for peasants. But Monnier, ink-stained and calloused, kept planting his iron-clad ideas. Unquote. He built garden troughs, then bridges, then beams that defied gravity. In 1875, his reinforced concrete bridge in Chazelet stood defiant, its iron sinews hidden beneath a stone-like skin. Still, the world hesitated. Traditionalists clung to brick and timber, but time, like roots in Monnier's pots, pressed on. By the 1890s, his patents had sprouted across Europe, though his name rarely graced the blueprints. He died in 1906, just as his flower pot trick began reshaping cities, his legacy buried, like iron in concrete, deep and unseen. What grows from this tale of mud and metal? That genius often hides in humble soil. That solutions need not be grand, just rooted in need. Monnier didn't set out to build cathedrals of steel. He wanted to save a rose. When your own problems seem small, when doubters call your tinkering trivial, remember his wire mesh. The mightiest structures, bridges, towers, revolutions, often begin as whispers, as quiet as a gardener's sigh over a cracked pot. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine Monnier's hands, rough with soil and wire, pressing concrete around iron veins. Let them remind you, strength lies not in standing rigid, but in bending together. And the next time you pass a skyscraper or cross a bridge, know that somewhere in its bones there hums the heart of a man who simply loved flowers and refused to let them fall. The modern bridges. Let's journey back to the smoke-choked skies of 19th century Britain, a time when iron groaned into shape, rivers were tamed, and the horizon itself seemed to bend under the weight of human ambition. Tonight, we cross the story of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a man who built bridges not just of iron, but of defiance, a visionary who stared down failure, ridicule, and the crushing weight of doubt to stitch a nation together. Brunel was born in 1806 to a father who tunneled beneath the Thames and a world that measured progress in coal and steam. By 20, he was already scarred, literally, by his craft. While helping build his father's Thames tunnel, the river burst through the walls, drowning workers, nearly claiming Brunel himself. He survived, but the incident etched a lesson. Progress is a duel with chaos, and chaos always strikes back. Undeterred, Brunel dreamed bigger. At 24, he designed the Clifton Suspension Bridge, a lacework of iron meant to span a gorge so wide, skeptics called it a rainbow for giants. For decades, the bridge remained unfinished, its towers rising like lonely sentinels, while Brunel battled bankrupt backers and engineers who scoffed, "It will collapse under its own shadow." Yet he scribbled revisions by candlelight, adjusting equations, whispering to the iron, "Hold." Then came the railways. Brunel's Great Western Railway wasn't just tracks. It was a rebellion against limits. His broad-gauge rails, wider and faster, clashed with the narrow standards of rivals. Locomotives like the Great Western and Iron Duke roared over viaducts he'd sketched, while critics jeered, "Too expensive, too bold." But Brunel, cigar clamped between teeth, pressed on. When his Great Eastern steamship, a leviathan 5 times larger than any ship, nearly bankrupted him, he faced down shareholders' rage and the press's cruelty with a weary grin. "The impossible," he said, "takes a little longer." Failure haunted him. The Great Eastern, dubbed Brunel's Folly, foundered as a passenger ship, its holds too vast, its purpose adrift. The Thames Tunnel, though completed, became a damp, haunted tourist curiosity. And the Clifton Bridge, his first love, remained skeletal at his death in 1859, its completion a posthumous tribute. Yet in the ashes of these failures glimmered embers of revolution, The Great Eastern laid the first transatlantic telegraph cable, binding continents. His railways became arteries of industry, and that unfinished bridge? Today, it stands as a monument, its iron threads weaving Bristol's skyline. What whispers linger in Brunel's rivets and blueprints? That vision outlives verdicts. Brunel's bridges weren't just steel and stone. They were arguments against doubt, against mediocrity, against the tyranny of enough. He didn't build to be loved, but to test the limits of possible. When the world called his dreams too grand, he simply built grander. So, what of the man behind the monuments? He died at 53, exhausted, his lungs choked by years of cigar smoke and tunnel dust. His final hours were spent dictating engine designs, his mind still racing ahead of the clock. The world mourned, then marched across his bridges, rode his rails, forgot the storms he'd weathered. But his true legacy? A question etched into iron. Why not tonight? As you drift into sleep, imagine those bridges, their spans arcing over rivers of resistance. Let them remind you, every impossible task is just a draft, waiting for a stubborn hand to revise it. Your own doubts, your unfinished projects, your critics, they are not endpoints, but part of the blueprint. Brunel's life whispers, build anyway, build especially when the world says stop. For the bridges we cross tomorrow are forged in the fires of today's failures. The boats. Let us drift back to a time when rivers were highways of wind and muscle, where sailboats bowed to the whims of breezes and rowers strained against currents that dragged time itself backward. A world waiting for a new heartbeat, a rhythm forged not by nature, but by fire and steam. Tonight, we sail into the story of Robert Fulton, a dreamer who faced waves of doubt and dared to ask, what if a boat could breathe? Born in 1765, Fulton was a child of rivers. His hands sketched submarines and canals long before they held a captain's wheel. But his mind churned with a singular vision, a vessel unchained from the wind. While others saw water as a force to obey, Fulton saw it as a path to conquer. Steam, he whispered, could tame the river. Yet the world scoffed. Sailors spat at the idea. Engineers called it madness, and investors clutched their purses. Fire and water? They laughed. A marriage doomed to drown. Undeterred, Fulton crossed the Atlantic seeking allies. In Paris, he met Robert Livingston, a diplomat with a pocket full of patents and a hunger for progress. Together, they forged a pact, and Fulton's hands began shaping iron and timber into a creature of smoke and ambition. But early tests hissed and sputtered. Boilers leaked, engines seized, and crowds gathered to jeer. Fulton's folly, they cried, as his prototypes sank like stones. Even Napoleon offered a sneering shrug. A toy for poets, not practical men. Yet, Fulton's resolve held anchor. He returned to New York, where the Hudson River curled like a question mark, and began building anew. His workshop hummed with grit, each bolt tightened, each pipe welded, as whispers of failure nipped at his heels. On August 17th, 1807, the North River steamboat, later called the Clermont, perched at the river's edge, its paddle wheels poised like wooden wings. Skeptics lined the docks, arms folded, voices sharp as gulls. It'll explode, some muttered. Others placed bets on how far it would sink. Then, the engine coughed to life. Smoke billowed, gears groaned, and the Clermont lurched forward, churning the Hudson into froth. Onlookers gasped as it gathered speed, leaving sailboats bobbing in its wake. For 32 hours, it clattered north to Albany, 150 miles against the current, a journey that once took weeks. Farmers gaped from fields, children chased its shadow, and doubters fell silent, their laughter drowned by the steady chug, chug, chug of triumph. Overnight, Fulton became a titan. His steamboat birthed a fleet, stitching cities together, ferrying goods and dreams. Rivers became clocks, their currents measured in coal and steam. Yet the man himself remained a mystery, quiet and tireless, his eyes fixed on horizons others couldn't see. When he died in 1815, the Clermont was already a relic, surpassed by grander ships. But its legacy rippled outward, a wake that never stilled. What whispers linger in the Clermont's steam? That ridicule is often the prologue to revolution. Fulton's genius wasn't in avoiding failure, but in sailing through it, stoking his engines with every no. When your own ideas meet stormy seas, when the world shouts sink, remember his stubborn fire. Progress is not a calm harbor, but a voyage, and the boldest captains are those who steer by starlight, even when the shore laughs at their maps. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the Clermont's first voyage, the Hudson parting before its iron will, the smoke curling into the sky like a victory flag. Let it remind you, every impossible journey begins with a single spark, a breath of steam, a heartbeat of courage. And the next time doubt whispers, "You'll fail," whisper back, "I'll float." The elevator, let us drift back to a time when cities stretched no higher than staircases could climb, when up was a journey of aching legs and weary breaths, and the idea of floating skyward in a box seemed the stuff of fairy tales. Tonight, we ascend into the story of Elisha Otis, a man who turned fear into faith and gave wings to the world, one trusting step at a time. In the 1850s, elevators were little more than creaking platforms hoisted by ropes and haunted by peril. A snapped cable meant catastrophe, a plummet into darkness, a crash echoing with finality. Warehouses used them for goods, but few dared ride, for why tempt fate? Enter Elisha Otis, a quiet mechanic with grease under his nails and a mind humming like a well-oiled gear. He worked in a factory, repairing broken machines, when inspiration struck. What if, he wondered, a falling elevator could catch itself? In his dimly lit workshop, Otis began tinkering. He studied wagon springs, the way they flexed and held. He sketched a simple idea, a metal frame with teeth, a spring-loaded brake, a rope that, if severed, would stop instead of surrender. For years, he refined the design, bending steel, testing weights, whispering to the mechanisms like a gardener to seeds. Yet, when he shared his safety elevator, the world shrugged. Why fix what isn't broken? Skeptics sneered, clinging to the familiar clatter of ropes and risk. But Otis knew trust was the true invention. So, in 1854, he staged a spectacle at New York's Crystal Palace. A crowd gathered, necks craned as he stepped onto an open platform, hoisted high above the floor. "Gentlemen," he declared, "I shall now cut the rope." Gasps rippled. Mothers clutched children. Men gripped hats. With a dramatic slash, the rope snapped. The platform lurched, then jolted, held fast by his hidden brake. The crowd erupted, not in panic, but awe. Otis tipped his hat, a small smile beneath his beard, and spoke softly. "All safe, gentlemen. All safe." The ripple was swift. Orders poured in, first for freight, then for passengers. Hotels, department stores, offices, all reached greedily toward the sky. Otis's brake became the silent guardian of every ascent, a promise etched in steel. Yet the man himself remained humble, a tinkerer at heart. He died in 1861. Just as his elevators began stitching the bones of skyscrapers, his name etched not on brass plaques, but in the collective breath held, then released. Every time doors closed and floors climbed, what whispers linger in those elevator shafts? That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to lift others above it. Otis didn't invent the elevator. He invented trust, a delicate currency. When you step into an elevator today, feel that gentle hum, that invisible hand holding you steady. It is his legacy, a reminder that even the loftiest dreams rest on simple acts of care. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine Otis's platform suspended between doubt and wonder, the brake's quiet click, a lullaby of safety. Let it remind you, life's rises and falls are inevitable, but with a little ingenuity and a lot of heart, we can build safeguards against the unknown. And sometimes the greatest leaps begin with a single, trusting breath. The compass. Let us drift back to a time when the sea was a labyrinth of shadows, when sailors steered by the whim of stars, and the horizon was a line drawn in fear. A world where lost was not a metaphor, but a death sentence, until a humble instrument, polished by countless hands, began to whisper secrets to the wind. Tonight, we sail into the story of the mariner's compass, a tale not of one inventor, but of centuries, seas, and souls who turned the unknown into a path. Long before it nestled in the palms of explorers, the compass began as magic. In ancient China, Han Dynasty mystics marveled at lodestone, a mineral that tugged toward the north like a lover's gaze. They floated it on wooden fish, calling it the south-pointing spoon, a tool for harmony, not navigation. Arab traders, crossing deserts with constellations as their maps, refined it, housing the stone in ornate boxes. But the sea, vast and voiceless, demanded more. Enter Flavio Gioja, a 14th-century Italian sailor, whose name clings to history like salt to skin. Though his life is fogged by time, legends say he gave the compass its wings. He mounted the needle on a pivot, cradled it in a wooden bowl, and painted a wind rose with 16 starry points. Now, even in storms, sailors could hold north in their hands, a star that never drowned. Yet Gioja stood on shoulders unseen. Persian mathematicians, Norse sunstones, Venetian mapmakers. The compass was not born, but grown, a chorus of curiosity across continents. Still, trust came slowly. Old captains scoffed. Why trade the gods' stars for a trembling needle? They clung to seabirds, to the color of waves, to myths of monsters. But the compass hummed a new truth. Direction was not a gift from heaven, but a craft, a dance between earth and iron. With it, Portuguese caravels dared beyond the edge of maps, Marco Polo's tales unfurled into trade routes, and the world, once flat and fanged, curled into a sphere of possibility. Centuries passed. The compass evolved, its face marked with degrees, its needle shielded from tempests. Yet its essence remained, a silent pact between human hands and the planet's hidden pulse. Even now, in the glow of satellites, every ship's wheel holds a compass, a relic of that first dialogue between fear and wonder. What whispers linger in its needle swing? That no one truly voyages alone. The compass, passed from Han Dynasty sages to Arab scholars, from Gioja's workshop to Columbus's helm, is a testament to patience, to the slow stitch of progress. When you feel adrift, remember, north is not a place, but a promise. And every great journey, whether across oceans or through life's squalls, is built on small, steady acts of trust. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient sailors, their hands steady on the compass rose, their eyes fixed on a horizon they could not yet see. Let them remind you, we are all navigators, charting courses through unseen currents. And though the stars may hide, the waves may roar, there is always, always a quiet needle within, guiding you home. The matchsticks. Let us drift back to a time when fire was a fickle friend, struck from flint and steel, or borrowed from embers that rarely lingered. A world where darkness held dominion, until a humble chemist, with curiosity as his candle, sparked a tiny revolution. Tonight, we kindle the story of John Walker, a man whose hands held light, but whose name flickered in the shadows of others' fame. In 1820s England, John Walker, an unassuming apothecary from Stockton, mixed potions and powders in a cluttered shop. His shelves brimmed with remedies, but his mind burned with a question. Could fire be tamed, not just conjured? One day, while stirring a paste of antimony and gum, his wooden stick scraped the hearth and burst into flame. A happy accident, a serendipitous spark. Walker's friction lights, later called matches, were born. Tiny torches, dipped in sulfur and tipped with wonder. Yet his triumph smoldered quietly. Walker's matches, sold in plain cardboard boxes, hissed to life with a scratch, their acrid smoke curling like ghostly rivings. Shopkeepers and sailors bought them, marveling at the convenience. But Walker, a man of science, not commerce, kept no patent. He scribbled notes in his ledger, called them congreves after rocket flares, and returned to his powders and vials, unaware of the inferno he'd ignited. Soon, others fanned the flame. Samuel Jones, a shrewd businessman, copied Walker's recipe, packaged matches in snuff-like tins, and branded them lucifers. They sold like stars falling to earth, lighting pipes, stoves, and the fingers of careless users. Germany's Kammerer, Sweden's Pascal, all borrowed the spark. Walker's name blurred, his role reduced to a footnote, while the world struck match after match, forgetting the hand that first struck the idea. Walker never fought for glory. He declined patents, fearing greed would warp his discovery. "It is a trifle," he murmured, "a small thing for the good of mankind." But history's pages, like matchboxes, are filled with names that burn brightest. When he died in 1859, his obituaries whispered of pharmacy, not fire. No statues rose in his honor, just the soft scratch of a million matches, lighting lamps, candles, and the way forward. What embers linger in this tale? That not all heroes stand in the spotlight. Some strike sparks in silence. Walker's matches, though eclipsed by others' brands, lit the path for safer, cleaner flames. His trifle thawed frozen hands, guided midnight readers, and kindled campfires under starry skies. Every flick of a match, even now, carries his legacy. A reminder that brilliance often goes unnamed, but never unshared. So, when your own efforts feel overlooked, when credit slips like smoke through your fingers, remember John Walker's quiet flame. Progress is a chorus, not a solo. The world is shaped by those who plant seeds in shadow, trusting others to carry the light. Your small thing, your unseen act, might warm a heart or guide a lost traveler home. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the first match, its brief hiss, its golden bloom in the dark. Let it remind you, even the faintest spark, in time, can ignite a dawn. And though your name may fade from the box, your light will linger in the hands and hearts you've quietly lit. The barometer. Let us drift back to a time when the air itself was a mystery, when scholars argued whether the sky was a weightless void or a sea of invisible forces. A world where storms arrived unannounced, and the very idea of nothingness terrified the learned mind. Tonight, we explore the story of Evangelista Torricelli, a man who weighed the heavens and dared to believe in the power of empty space. In 17th century Italy, Torricelli, a thinker with Galileo's shadow at his back, pondered a riddle. Why did water in pumps rise only 30 feet and no higher? Farmers grumbled, engineers shrugged, but Torricelli saw a hidden hand, the weight of the air itself. What if, he mused, the atmosphere presses down like an ocean and limits the water's climb? To test this, he traded water for quicksilver, mercury, a liquid 14 times heavier, and poured it into a glass tube sealed at one end. He inverted the tube into a dish and watched. The mercury fell, but not all the way. A space yawned at the top, empty, nothing. Torricelli's heart quickened. He'd created a vacuum, a concept so radical it defied Aristotle's ancient decree. Nature abhors a vacuum. Scholars recoiled. Impossible, they cried. The tube must hide invisible vapors or divine forces. Even fellow scientists dismissed it, clinging to the comfort of old truths. Yet, Torricelli stood firm. His mercury column became the first barometer, a window into the invisible push and pull of the atmosphere. When storms approached, the mercury dipped, as if the sky itself were sighing. When fair weather loomed, it rose, a silent promise of sun. But doubters remained. One cardinal sneered. "You measure emptiness, a fantasy." Torricelli, ever patient, replied, "I measure the weight of doubt and find it heavier than air." Years passed. Others replicated his experiment, grudgingly bending to the truth. The vacuum, once deemed heresy, became a cornerstone of science. Torricelli's barometer spread, guiding sailors, farmers, and dreamers. Yet, he never saw his full legacy. He died young, at 39. His name whispered more in labs than in public squares. But his emptitude, that defiant void, reshaped humanity's grasp of the sky. What whispers linger in that mercury shimmer? That truth often hides in the spaces we fear to acknowledge. Torricelli's genius wasn't just in seeing the vacuum, but in trusting the void. When the world insists nothing is there, remember his courage. Progress begins where certainty ends, in the quiet, the questioned, the courageously empty. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine Torricelli's tube, its mercury catching candlelight, its vacuum holding secrets yet unborn. Let it remind you, even the air you breathe, unseen, unfelt, carries the weight of wonders. And sometimes, the bravest act is to believe in the invisible, to measure the immeasurable, and to find peace in the unknown. Modern Lock and Key. Let us drift back to a time when the night's silence was broken not by crickets, but by the creak of a floorboard, the rattle of a loose latch. A world where doors swung on hinges of trust, and homes relied on rudimentary bolts, easily picked, easily breached. Tonight, we turn the key to the story of Linus Yale Jr., a man who wove ingenuity into iron and gave the world a guardian that whispers, "You are safe." In the 1840s, Linus Yale Jr., a locksmith with curiosity in his veins, inherited more than his father's tools. He inherited a question: how can we protect what matters most? At his workshop in Newport, New York, he studied the clunky locks of the past, their secrets laid bare by simple twists of wire. His father's designs, once revolutionary, now felt like riddles too easily solved. So Yale bent over his bench, fingers tracing the grooves of possibility, and began to carve a new kind of silence. His answer lay in a dance of pins and patience. Imagine a lock as a puzzle, its heart a row of tiny, uneven pins. Only a key, cut with valleys and peaks, could lift them just so, aligning the hidden gaps like stars finding their constellation. This was the pin tumbler lock, born in 1848, a masterpiece of precision. No longer could a thief's crude tools mimic the key's secret song. Yale's creation was a gatekeeper, a silent sentry, turning no into yes only for those who held the right melody of metal. But Yale's mind, restless as a river, flowed beyond doors. He gazed at the iron safes of banks and shops, their thick walls mocked by clever thieves. So he wove his pin tumbler magic into their very cores, crafting locks that defied picks and drills. His safes became fortresses, guarding gold, heirlooms, and the fragile peace of mind that lets sleep come easy. Still, skeptics scoffed. "Why complicate what works?" they muttered, clinging to old bolts and false confidence. Yet, as whispers of burglaries faded where Yale's locks were hung, doubters fell quiet, one secure door at a time. Years unfurled, the Yale Lock Company, founded on that simple promise of safety, grew into a symphony of clicks and turns. His designs crossed oceans, nestled into homes, libraries, and the vaults of nations. And though Yale himself passed in 1868, his legacy tightened its grip on the world. Today, his name adorns locks in cities and villages, a quiet testament to trust forged in iron. What whispers linger in the turn of a key? That safety is not a wall, but a bridge, to rest, to trust, to the comfort of knowing some doors are meant to stay closed. Yale's locks did more than guard gold. They guarded dreams. A shopkeeper's earnings, a child's diary, a family's heirlooms, all rested behind his silent sentinels, freeing hearts to beat unburdened by fear. So, when you hear the soft snick of a lock tonight, let it remind you, even in stillness, there is work being done. The world is held together by such small, steadfast acts of care, and every turn of a key, every click of a bolt is a covenant between inventor and stranger. A promise that says, sleep deep, the night is kept watch by more than stars. The loom. Let us drift back to a time when silk was spun by hand, when the clatter of looms echoed through Lyon's cobblestone streets, and skilled weavers painted tapestries with threads as delicate as whispers. Tonight, we weave through the story of Joseph Marie Jacquard, a man whose invention danced with both brilliance and rebellion, and taught the world that progress, like thread, must sometimes fray before it holds. In the early 1800s, Lyon's silk weavers were artists, their hands choreographing intricate patterns passed down through generations. But the work was slow, each pull of the loom a symphony of human effort. Joseph, the son of a master weaver, dreamed of a different rhythm. He envisioned a loom that could breathe on its own, guided not by tired hands, but by punched cards, a language of holes and light. His creation, the Jacquard loom, was a marvel. Cards pierced with patterns dictated the dance of threads. Flowers blooming, dragons coiling, all without a weaver's touch. But the loom's beauty masked a storm. Workers saw it as a thief, a machine that would steal their craft, their bread. They smashed his prototypes in the dark, set fire to workshops, and hurled curses like shuttles. Automation, they spat, is the end of art. Joseph, his heart heavy, fled Lyon, his invention in tatters. Yet he returned. Quietly, stubbornly, he rebuilt. The loom's second act was quieter. Its cards now metal, its patterns flawless. When Napoleon himself praised it, calling it poetry in motion, the weaver's fury turned to fear. But Joseph offered a compromise. His loom would not replace them, it would elevate them. Complex designs once impossible by hand now flowed like rivers, and weavers became conductors, guiding the machine's ballet. Still, the world shifted. Some embraced the loom, others clung to tradition. Joseph died in 1834, his name etched into the fabric of industry. His legacy, a tapestry of triumph and tension. Decades later, his punched cards inspired the first computers. Threads of silk becoming threads of code. What whispers linger in the clatter of his loom? That change, even when resisted, stitches new possibilities. The weaver's fear was real, their anger justified. But progress cannot be unspun. When faced with the unknown, we have a choice: to snap the threads or weave them into something greater. Joseph's story reminds us, innovation is not a duel between human and machine, but a collaboration, a shared pattern of curiosity and care. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those punched cards, their holes like starlight guiding the loom's dance. Let them remind you, every revolution begins with a single thread of courage, and even the fiercest storms, in time, become part of the tapestry. Your fears, your doubts, are not knots to be cut, but patterns waiting to be redesigned. The battery. Let us drift back to a time when electricity was a ghost in the air, a spark seen only in lightning or in the twitch of a frog's leg, a world where science whispered that life itself held the secret to power, until a curious Italian physicist with a mind as sharp as a circuit dared to ask, what if the spark lives in the silence between metals? Tonight, we trace the story of Alessandro Volta, a man who turned skepticism into current. In the late 1700s, Luigi Galvani, a Bologna scientist, made frogs' legs dance with the touch of a metal scalpel. Animal electricity, he declared, claiming life itself held the charge. But Volta, a professor in Pavia, sensed a different truth. No, he murmured, it's the metals, not the muscle. To prove it, he pressed his tongue between silver and zinc, felt the bitter tang of current, a whisper of energy born not of flesh, but of chemistry. For years, he stacked discs of zinc and copper, separated by brine-soaked cloth, like layers of a metallic sandwich. Each pair hummed with a faint charge, but together they sang. In 1800, his voltaic pile roared to life, the first true battery, a tower of tiny storms. Yet the scientific world buzzed with doubt. Galvani's disciples hissed, "You reduce life to mere metal." Even Napoleon, though he awarded Volta medals, missed the spark of revolution in those humble discs. Volta's hands, stained with acid, trembled not from fatigue, but frustration. "Why cling to mystery," he wrote, "when the answer lies in the contact, not the creature?" He toured Europe, demonstrating his pile, igniting gases, melting wires, turning doubters' gasps into applause. Still, some refused to see. "A parlor trick," they scoffed, until laboratories worldwide echoed with the crackle of his invention, and Galvani's frogs fell silent in the shadow of progress. What whispers linger in those brine-damp layers? That truth often hides where we least think to look. Volta's pile was more than a battery. It was a bridge between biology and physics, between doubt and discovery. He didn't just capture electricity, he unchained it, proving that wonder lives not only in the living, but in the quiet dance of elements. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine Volta's stack of discs, their metallic breath humming in the dark. Let them remind you, even when the world insists a door is locked, curiosity holds a key. Your doubts, your what-ifs are not distractions, but conductors. And every small spark of insight, no matter how mocked, can light a path through the unknown. Dear listener, may your dreams, like Volta's enduring current, flow undimmed by doubt, and may your quietest questions, in time, power revolutions unseen. The ballon, hot air. Let us drift back to a time when the sky was a realm reserved for birds and angels, when the very idea of flight was a poet's fancy, a madman's dream, a world tethered to the earth, until two brothers, papermakers by trade, turned smoke and silk into wings. Tonight, we float into the story of Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier, whose audacious leap into the heavens redefined what it means to rise. In 1783, in the quiet French town of Annonay, the Montgolfier brothers watched embers from a fire lift scraps of paper like ghostly dancers. "What if," Joseph whispered, "we could harness this, make a vessel ride the heat?" Their workshop became a cradle of curiosity. They stitched sacks of linen and paper, lit fires beneath them, and gasped as their creations billowed, strained, and bobbed toward the ceiling. But the brothers dreamed bigger, much bigger. On June 4th, beneath a cobalt sky, they unveiled a balloon 33 feet tall, its fabric painted with golden zodiac signs. Villagers gathered, skeptics folded their arms, and the brothers fed straw and wool into a smoky blaze. The balloon swelled, groaned, and then, as if kissed by the wind, it ascended. For 10 minutes, it floated, a trembling pearl over the countryside, before landing gently in a vineyard. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in stunned silence. For the first time, humanity had touched the sky without wings. News raced to Paris. King Louis XVI, intrigued, summoned the brothers to Versailles. There, before a crowd of nobles in powdered wigs, they launched a sheep, a duck, and a rooster in a basket beneath a grand balloon. The creature soared, circled, and landed unharmed. The king clapped, Marie Antoinette marveled, and the world leaned in. But Joseph and Etienne weren't done. Next, they vowed, a man will fly. Months later, on November 21st, the brothers stood in the gardens of La Muette. Their new balloon, adorned with fleur-de-lis, loomed like a giant's lantern. Beneath it, a wicker basket held 2 volunteers, Pilatre de Rosier, a daring scientist, and the Marquis d'Arlanz, a wide-eyed aristocrat. The king had suggested sending condemned criminals, but Pilatre refused. Honor, he said, belongs to the willing. As flames roared, the balloon strained, and then, with a collective gasp, it lifted. For 25 minutes, they drifted over Paris, the Seine glittering below, rooftops shrinking into patchwork. Peasants gaped, chickens scattered, and church bells rang in alarm. The Marquis, panicking, tossed straw onto the fire to rise higher, while Pilatre shouted, "We are ruining the balloon!" Yet they landed safely, their coats smudged with soot, their hearts pounding with the echo of the impossible. King Louis, though wary of revolution stirring in his streets, declared it a triumph of French genius. Yet, the brothers' ascent was not without dissent. Critics called it a frivolous spectacle. Priests warned of defying God's domain, and even the balloon's fabric, singed and patched, seemed to whisper, was it worth the risk? But the Montgolfiers knew. They had unstitched the sky. Their balloons soon floated over Europe, inspiring inventors, artists, and dreamers. Joseph, ever the visionary, sketched plans for aerial armies, while Etienne, the pragmatist, refined designs. But time, like the balloons, drifted on. Joseph died in 1810, Etienne in 1799, neither living to see their invention seed the age of aviation. What whispers linger in those silk and smoke clouds? That curiosity, like fire, is both creator and destroyer. The Montgolfiers did not just conquer the sky. They exposed its fragility, its openness to anyone brave enough to light a flame. Their story reminds us the greatest barriers are not in the heavens, but in the mind. When the world says stay, progress whispers, why not rise? Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that first balloon, its shadow gliding over wheat fields, its fire hissing like a lullaby. Let it remind you, every dream, no matter how weightless, how fleeting, leaves a mark on the wind. And even if your own flight ends in a vineyard, or a crash, or a quiet fade, know this: you have already soared higher than those who never dared to light the flame. The Archimedean screw. Let us drift back to sun-drenched Sicily, where the Mediterranean Sea whispers against ancient shores and olive groves stretch toward the horizon. A time when water was both life's nectar and its torment. Too scarce in the dry months, too abundant when storms roared. Tonight, we wander through the story of Archimedes, a thinker whose mind flowed like water, and the simple, spiraling marvel that taught humanity to bend nature's rules without bending metal. In the 3rd century BCE, King Hiero II of Syracuse faced a puzzle. His farmers struggled to coax crops from parched earth, while his ships languished in harbors clogged with rainwater. How, he asked Archimedes, can we move water as easily as we move thoughts? The scholar, already famed for shouting "Eureka" in his bath, pondered. He watched snails spiral in their shells, saw reeds twist in river currents, and wondered. Could a simple curve lift what straight lines could not? Days turned to nights as Archimedes sketched in the sand, his fingers tracing endless loops. Then it came, a design so elegant it seemed plucked from a dream. A wooden cylinder, a helix coiled inside like a serpent's slumber, and a handle to spin it. No gears, no iron, just the marriage of geometry and motion. The screw, he declared, will carry water uphill as effortlessly as a swallow rides the wind. Carpenters carved the first prototype, skeptics leaning over their shoulders. Archimedes dipped one end into a stream and turned the handle. The screw groaned, then sighed, as water climbed the spiral, spilling from the top like liquid laughter. Farmers marveled, cupping the flow in calloused hands. "It's magic," they whispered. Archimedes shook his head. "No, it's mind, shaping what the earth provides." Word spread. The screw danced in fields, lifting water to thirsty crops. It hummed in mines, draining floods from dark tunnels. Sailors leaned on its handle, clearing harbors under the watchful eyes of gulls. Yet its beauty lay in its simplicity. Wood, not wrought iron, bending to human will. No kingdom's wealth, no god's favor, just a spiral and the turn of a hand. But Archimedes, ever the philosopher, saw deeper. The screw is a lesson, he told his students. Nature's secrets are not locked. They flow, waiting to be shaped by curiosity. When critics scoffed, "Why not build with bronze?" he smiled. "Why complicate what the world gives freely? A child could mend this, centuries past." Empires rose and crumbled, yet the screw endured. It greened deserts, quenched the thirst of Rome's legions. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the soft creak of that first screw, the rhythm of its turn, the shimmering ribbon of water defying gravity. Let it remind you, even the simplest ideas, born of observing a shell, a reed, a snail's path, can lift worlds. And though your own challenges may seem immovable, trust that somewhere, in the quiet spiral of your mind, a solution is rising, ready to spill forth. The currency. Let us drift back to a sunlit land where the river Pactolus sparkled with gold, and bustling markets hummed with the chatter of traders. A time when a loaf of bread might cost 3 goats, or a bolt of silk, or a promise scribbled on clay. Tonight, we wander through the story of the Lydians, an ancient people who turned chaos into order and gifted the world a small, shining idea: money. In the 7th century BCE, Lydia, a kingdom nestled in what is now Turkey, thrived on trade. But barter was a language without rules. A farmer might swap wheat for wool, only to find the wool was moth-eaten, or a potter's vase shattered before reaching its buyer. How, the Lydians wondered, can we trust what we cannot hold? Their answer lay in the river's gift, electrum, a golden-silver alloy washed down from the mountains, and the spark of a revolutionary thought. Let us stamp trust into metal. Artisans heated the electrum, poured it into molds, and pressed it with lions' heads, the mark of King Aliate's reign. These first coins, uneven and rustic, carried a king's promise, their weight, their worth, guaranteed. No longer would traders argue over goats or grain, for a coin was a tiny pact, a whisper of "I believe." Yet trust is a fragile thing. Electrum's mix of gold and silver varied, making some coins more precious than others. Cunning merchants bit them, testing purity, while forgers melted cheap metals into lookalikes. The Lydians adapted, refining the coins under King Croesus, crafting pure gold and silver, their faces stamped with snarling lions and bulls. Rich as Croesus became a proverb, but the true wealth was the idea. Value, once fluid as the Pactolus, now flowed in standardized drops. Markets transformed. Strangers traded with strangers, coins passing hand to hand across deserts and seas. A farmer in Sardis could buy Egyptian linen. A Greek merchant could trust a Lydian silver. And the world, slowly, began to spin on the axis of money. But with this power came peril. Greed bloomed. Hoards were buried. Wars were waged for mines. The Lydians, who'd sought only to simplify, had unearthed a force as double-edged as a sword. What whispers linger in these ancient coins? That trust, once scattered like river gold, can be gathered, stamped, and shared. The Lydians didn't just invent money. They invented a language of reliability, a contract etched in metal. When you hold a coin today, feel its ridges, its weight, and remember, it is a bridge spanning millennia, connecting your hand to a king's promise under the Anatolian sun. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those first Lydian coins. The glassmaking. Let us drift back to a moonlit shore along the Mediterranean, where waves whispered secrets to the sand, and Phoenician sailors, weary from a day of trade, huddled around a crackling fire. A night like any other, until chance and curiosity conspired, and the world gained a new way to hold light. Tonight, we trace the story of glass, born not of intention, but of a spark, a surprise, and the restless wonder of those ancient craftsmen of the sea. The Phoenicians, famed for their purple dyes and cedar ships, were masters of the unexpected. They navigated by stars, bartered across continents, and carried treasures in their holds. But one evening, on a beach near the mouth of the Belus River, a simple act of survival birthed a miracle. The sailors piled blocks of natron, a salty soda from Egypt's dry lakes, beneath their cooking pots to steady them over the flames. As the fire roared, the natron and sand beneath it fused, melting into a translucent stream that hardened like frozen starlight. Morning revealed the gleam, a smooth, mysterious substance, neither stone nor metal, but something entirely new. At first, they marveled. What sorcery was this? The nuggets of glass, cool to the touch, yet born of fire, caught the dawn light like captured sunbeams. The sailors pocketed them as curiosities, but Phoenician artisans, ever curious, saw potential. They began to experiment, blending sand and soda in clay furnaces, coaxing the mixture to melt at searing heat. Trial after trial, they shaped beads, tiny vessels, amulets, each piece a fragile testament to their patience. Soon, these glowing trinkets adorned nobles in Egypt, filled markets in Babylon, and became treasures as coveted as silver. Yet the path of discovery was tangled. Early glass was murky, bubbled, prone to shattering. Undeterred, the craftsmen tweaked their recipes, adding lime from crushed seashells or manganese to clear the haze. They learned to wind molten glass around clay cores, creating delicate bottles for perfumes, those precious liquids the Phoenicians ferried across the seas. With each innovation, glass grew clearer, brighter, a mirror for the world's beauty. But how did this accident reshape their world? Glass, once a campfire's whim, became a currency of wonder. Phoenician traders, those shrewd wanderers, carried glass beads to distant shores, swapping them for spices, silks, and stories. In time, their workshops glowed day and night, furnaces roaring like dragon's breath, as artisans blew and twisted glass into forms as fluid as the sea itself. Empires took note. Pharaohs demanded glass tiles for palaces, priests sought colored glass to mimic gemstones, and commoners cherished tiny vials to hold their dreams. What of the sailors who sparked it all? Their names are lost to the waves, but their legacy glimmers still. For the Phoenicians, glass was more than a craft, it was a metaphor. Just as sand, humble and endless, could be transformed by fire, so too could the ordinary become extraordinary with heat, vision, and time. They, who had always danced with the unpredictable, understood that the greatest treasures often rise from unplanned moments. Centuries unfurled. The Romans perfected glassblowing. Medieval monks crafted stained windows to touch the divine. And today, we sip from glass vessels, peer through glass panes, yet rarely ponder its fiery birth. But the lesson remains, nestled in every shard and splendor. Life's most luminous breakthroughs often begin as flickers, accidents waiting for a curious mind to fan them into flame. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient sands, the fire's orange tongues, the sailors' gasps as they lifted the first fragile glass. Let it remind you, not all that shines is planned. Your stumbles, your surprises, your unscripted moments, they too hold the spark of something beautiful. Trust the alchemy of chance, and remember, even the simplest grains of experience, with time and heat, can become translucent, transformative, and timeless. The aqueducts. Let us drift back to a time when Rome's hills echoed with the clamor of chisels, where thirst loomed as large as empire, and the answer flowed not from conquest, but from stone. Tonight, we follow the story of the aqueducts, silent giants that taught the world how to marry muscle and mind, and turned rivers into hymns of human will. In the heart of the Republic, Rome swelled. Her fountains ran dry, her baths stood empty. Her people whispered of gods angered. But engineers, not priests, held the solution. Water, they said, must climb mountains without magic. And so began the aqueducts, a dance of precision and perseverance, where every stone carried the weight of a civilization's thirst. Imagine the first surveyors tracing paths across rugged hills, their chorobates leveling the earth with water-filled grooves. A slope too steep, and the torrent would erode the channel. Too gentle, and the flow would stall. 1 foot every mile, the rule whispered from master to apprentice. No room for error, only the patient tap of hammers, the groan of oxen dragging limestone, the sweat of thousands whose names history forgot. Laborers, free and enslaved, quarried rock under sun and whip. They stacked arches like celestial bridges, each keystone a prayer to gravity, mortar mixed with volcanic ash, a recipe from Pompeii's shadow, hardened into eternity. Yet the true marvel was invisibility. The aqueducts snaked underground, through tunnels dark as Hades, then soared above valleys on tiered arcades, so the water, pure and cool, might descend as if by nature's hand. For centuries, they built the Aqua Appia, the Marcia, the Claudius, each a ribbon of survival. Water spilled into cisterns, flushed through latrines, bubbled in Nymphia where lovers met. Rome, once parched, now floated on liquid grace. But the cost? Bones buried in collapsed tunnels, villages displaced, forests strict for scaffolding. The aqueducts were not kindness. They were necessity, carved by sacrifice. What whispers linger in those ancient channels? That greatness is a chorus, not a solo. The engineer's calculus, the mason's calloused hands, the slave's silent toil, all flowed into one. The aqueducts remind us, no single drop claims the river, yet together they carve canyons. When your own tasks feel insurmountable, remember, even the mightiest ark began as a single stone, placed with care, and the faith that others would follow. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the aqueduct song, the murmur of water through stone, the sigh of arches bearing time's weight. Let them remind you, life's most vital currents are built not by force, but by patience, precision, and the quiet courage to bend Earth itself toward a brighter tomorrow. Your struggles, your impossible tasks, are but stones in an unseen arcade, waiting to channel something timeless. The printing blocks. Let us drift back to a moonlit workshop in ancient China, where the scent of sandalwood mingled with the earthy tang of ink. A time when words traveled not on wings, but on the patient shoulders of carved wood. Tonight, we wander through the story of woodblock printing, a quiet revolution that cradled knowledge in its grain. Centuries before the world would hear Gutenberg's name. Unquote. In the heart of the Tang dynasty, an artisan bends over a slab of pear wood, their chisel whispering secrets into the timber. Each stroke is a prayer, each groove a promise. They carve a poem, a Buddhist sutra, a map of stars, reversing the characters like a puzzle only paper could solve. Nearby, a brush sweeps ink over the raised lines, dark as midnight, and a sheet of delicate paper is pressed down, kissed by the wood's memory. When lifted, the page breathes, alive with words that will outlast dynasties. This was woodblock printing, born not of haste, but of reverence. Long before Europe's presses, Chinese scholars and monks sought to share wisdom without the fragility of a scribe's hand. They carved whole pages into wood, line by line, character by character, until the block itself became a library. The oldest surviving book, the Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 CE, still whispers its teachings from a British museum shelf, a testament to ink and endurance. Imagine the journey. A single block, days or weeks in the making, could print 1,000 pages. Farmers carried almanacs to predict rains. Children traced primers filled with Confucian grace, and pilgrims clutched sutras rolled into scrolls. Knowledge, once caged in bamboo or silk, now fluttered freely, like cranes released from a cage. Yet, this art demanded more than skill. It asked for harmony. The wood's texture, the ink's consistency, the press of a palm, all had to dance as one. But why carve when copying by hand was an age-old tradition? Because the world was vast and hunger for ideas grew. A monk in Chang'an could share a sacred text with a brother in Korea. A poet's verses could ripple across provinces, and the heartbeat of a culture could pulse steadily, unbroken by time or distance. The blocks themselves, worn smooth with use, became heirlooms, passed down like cherished stories. Centuries later, in a German workshop, Gutenberg would forge movable type, his metal letters dancing to rearrange themselves. But the Chinese blocks, steadfast and whole, had already sung their songs. They were not lesser, only different, a chorus of patience, each block a monument to a single page's perfection. Where Gutenberg sought speed, the East embraced stillness, proving that progress wears many robes. What whispers linger in these wooden pages? That sharing knowledge is an act of love, a bridge across time. The artisans' names are lost, their hands dust, but their legacy lingers in every book you hold. For in those ancient grooves, we find the roots of libraries, the ancestors of fonts, the quiet beginning of a world where ideas could touch millions, yet still feel intimate as a candlelit scroll. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the shh of a chisel, the rustle of rice paper, the glow of characters born from wood and will. Let them remind you, some revolutions are silent, patient, built not on noise, but on the beauty of repetition. And just as those blocks carried words across mountains, so too can your small, steady acts, in time, become the voice of centuries. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams, like the woodblock's timeless ink, leave gentle impressions, and may you always remember that every page turned is a whisper from a moonlit workshop where the past still presses close, urging us to cherish and to share. The Telegraph. Let's slip back to a world where news crawled, where a mother might wait weeks to hear her child had survived a fever, where love letters gathered dust in stagecoaches, and wars ended long before word arrived. Tonight, we trace the story of a painter turned prophet of pulses, Samuel Morse, and the flickering code that shrank the world. But only after a marathon of doubt and a Congress that took its time to listen. Samuel Morse began not as an inventor, but as an artist. Born in 1791, He painted grand portraits, his brush capturing the faces of presidents and poets. But fate, as it often does, rewrote his story. In 1825, while Morse worked on a portrait in Washington, a horse-drawn messenger brought him a letter. His beloved wife, ill for days, had died. By the time he raced home, she was already buried. The distance between them, mere miles, had become an uncrossable gulf. Grief-stricken, he vowed to conquer time, to stitch the world together so no one else would mourn in silence. For years, Morse wrestled with sparks and wires. He abandoned canvases for coils, traded pigments for pulses of electricity. His idea? A machine that could send coded messages instantly. A telegraph. But skeptics laughed. Electricity fades, they said. You can't tame it. Undeterred, Morse partnered with Alfred Vail, a young mechanic with clockmaker's hands. Together, they crafted a crude transmitter, a receiver, and an alphabet of dots and dashes. Morse code. A language so simple, it could whisper across continents. Yet, the real battle wasn't technical, it was bureaucratic. For 7 years, Morse petitioned Congress, begging for funds to string a telegraph line between Washington and Baltimore. Lawmakers yawned. They called it a fairy tale, a waste of gold. Some sneered. Why not just use messengers? Morse, now gray and threadbare, sold his paintings to eat, but he clung to his vision, pacing the Capitol's marble halls, his pockets empty, his voice hoarse from pleading. Finally, on the last hour of the last day of the 1843 session, Congress granted him $30,000. Less than a railroad snack, but enough to begin. The work was grueling. Poles were planted, wires strung, storms tore them down. Newspapers jeered, Morse's folly. But on May 24, 1844, in the shadow of the Capitol, Morse sat before his contraption and tapped a verse from the Bible chosen by Vail's mother. What hath God wrought? In Baltimore, Vail heard the clicks, decoded the dots, and tapped back. The room erupted, but Morse, ever solemn, wept. The message took moments, but the journey, 19 years. Within a decade, wires crisscrossed nations, news leaping oceans, markets sinking like heartbeat. Morse died rich, but still haunted, his code outliving empires, his name etched into the airwaves. Yet few remember the nights he starved, the politicians who scoffed, the way history bends, not for the loudest, but for the stubborn. What lingers in his dots and dashes? A lesson in tenacity. Morse's genius wasn't the telegraph. It was his refusal to let no be the final word. When you face your own delays, your own chorus of not yet, remember his 19 winters of waiting. The world resists change until it doesn't. Your idea, your voice, your impossible might be a few dots away from a breakthrough. Progress is a lagging signal, but it always arrives for those who keep tapping.